The soft reach of candlelight trembles, casting dancing shadows that seem to possess a life of their own. The air, heavy and still, carries the unmistakable scent of aged wax and ancient paper, a quiet exhalation from the library's venerable depths. High above, in the unseen rafters, the wood sighs with a slow, deliberate creak, a solitary protest against the passage of time. It is within this profound hush that an audacious question dares to surface, not yet spoken aloud, for such inquiries prefer to unfurl slowly, stretching their speculative limbs within the mind before seeking voice. What if, in a radical departure from accepted dogma, Jesus of Nazareth had fathered children? What if, instead of his narrative culminating in the poignant sorrow of Golgotha, his direct lineage had quietly interwoven itself with the currents of history, navigating through the ages under assumed identities, traversing the shadowy corridors of power, safeguarded by individuals whose fealty extended beyond any earthly crown? This is precisely the kind of proposition that elicits a distinct frown from the scholarly community, prompts a cautious avoidance from the clergy, and, for those who weave narratives, it often draws forth a faint, knowing smile. The very essence of this inquiry places one foot firmly on the solid bedrock of documented history, while the other rests precariously on the mist-shrouded plank of pure possibility. Esteemed historians are quick to point out that no contemporary Roman records offer any mention of offspring born to Jesus. The Gospels, whether canonized or apocryphal, maintain a profound silence on the subject. Yet, within the delicate margins of ancient manuscripts, nestled between the curling, yellowed leaves of monastic glosses, tantalizing whispers can be discerned. A beloved companion appearing here, an enigmatic journey to the south of Gaul alluded to there. Even amidst the meticulous, often dry landscape of academic discourse, these subtle clues sow the potent seeds of profound speculation. The discovery of a so-called family tomb in Jerusalem during the 1980s continues to fuel debate among a segment of historians, who ponder whether its peculiar constellation of names was truly nothing more than a historical coincidence. While the vast majority of scholars readily dismiss this notion as mere happenstance, a select few, a breed of archaeologists known for their dusty boots and an undeniable appetite for challenging established narratives, tend to linger a little longer over the tomb's faded inscriptions, their fingers tracing letters that seem to murmur in quiet defiance of long-held orthodoxies, suggesting a story far more intricate than initially assumed. Should such a lineage have indeed existed, its very survival would have necessitated an extraordinary degree of protection. Not from the long-vanished Roman legions, but from the treacherous, ever-shifting political and religious alliances of medieval Christendom, an era where bloodline equated to power, and power was an inherently perilous commodity. It is at this juncture that the distinctive red cross of the Knights Templar, those enigmatic warrior monks, drifts into the path of this historical investigation. Officially charged with safeguarding pilgrims journeying to the Holy Land, the Templars may, in a more clandestine capacity, have been entrusted with guarding a very different kind of sacred passenger, a precious bloodline, moving with hushed discretion from one port to another, from fortified castle to secluded keep, much like a holy relic deemed too sacred, too vulnerable for public display. One might envision a dimly lit chamber within a 12th century fortress, the air thick with the pungent smoke of a peat fire. A knight, cloaked in the Templars' distinctive white mantle, kneels, head bowed, not before a gilded reliquary, but in silent homage to a woman standing shrouded in shadow, her face obscured by a deep hood. While no formal record of such a scene exists in any official ledger, the imagined scent of that fire and the precise scrape of that kneeling gesture possess a vividness that feels almost too real, too specific, to be entirely a product of pure invention. Naturally, a measure of caution is warranted when navigating these speculative waters. Fringe theories, by their very nature, often find their foundation on the yielding timber of wishful thinking. Some proponents paint elaborate tapestries of grand conspiracies, secret marital unions, ancient parchments clandestinely smuggled through tempestuous seas, or sacred bloodlines meticulously concealed behind intricate layers of false heraldry. And yet, is it not profoundly curious that such narratives persist with such tenacity, traversing centuries, adopting new guises, but never truly shedding their fundamental essence? The seekers of these truths find themselves akin to sailors who, across different eras and with varied charts, continue to sight the same mysterious island. As the candlelight flickers lower, the journey feels as though it has only just begun, yet the room itself seems to have subtly transformed, its ancient walls drawing imperceptibly closer, as if eager to absorb every forthcoming revelation. Deep within the mind's labyrinthine corridors, the faintest echo of a distant church bell can be perceived. It is not the familiar summons to worship, but rather an insistent call to deeper wonder. And so, the inquiry presses onward, allowing the central question to take root and deepen. For this moment, no definitive answer is demanded. Instead, there is a shared willingness to follow wherever the unfolding narrative may lead. The question is now settled into the candlelit air, much like incense, initially sweet, then growing sharper, curling into the room's hidden corners and lingering in the folds of collective thought. It accompanies the journeyers now, as they step softly through the narrow, stone-hewn passage of a cloister, where the air carries the faint, refreshing scent of rain on ancient limestone. Beyond the cloister's protective embrace, the night sky stretches, a vast expanse devoid of the moon's comforting glow, illuminated only by a sparse scattering of stars, each one trembling in the cold like a profound secret poised for revelation. Ahead, past a series of elegant arched windows, the low murmur of an old monk's voice becomes discernible, thin and wavering, reminiscent of parchment left too close to a flickering flame. He is recounting a tale, yet it is not one found within the official liturgies or hallowed texts. This story is far more ancient, older even than the very abbey walls that contain it. A narrative of a wounded king, whose lands languish in sympathy with his suffering, and who perpetually awaits a mysterious cup to be brought to his lips. "The Fisher King," he intones, his voice not solemn, but conspiratorial, as if this particular legend were not meant for the hushed sanctity of the chapel, but rather for the intimate setting of the refectory, once the candles have burned low. In his hushed telling, the cup is not merely the Holy Grail, it is a vessel carrying a bloodline. "Blood of the king and king of the blood," he murmurs, the phrase worn smooth, almost sacred, by centuries of fervent retelling. Among historians, a persistent debate continues regarding whether this specific iteration of the Grail story represents a relatively late medieval invention, or conversely, a faint echo of something far more ancient. perhaps a Gnostic whisper carried westward from the distant Levant. Mainstream scholars, predictably, tend to anchor the figure of the Fisher King firmly within the rich tapestry of Celtic myth, viewing him as a potent literary symbol cleverly repurposed within Christian allegory. Yet a cadre of fringe researchers, often armed with an abundance of time and an impressive collection of library cards, meticulously draw thin, yet undeniably tempting, lines of connection between the Grail, the purported family of Jesus, and the clandestine guardianship of certain knightly orders. They highlight that in several versions of the legend, the Fisher King's enigmatic domain is said to lie beneath the protective shadow of a formidable fortified order whose emblem, with striking curiosity, is a red cross. The monk pauses, taking a slow sip from his own cup, a small, dented vessel that, beneath layers of grime, might be humble pewter, or perhaps even precious silver. A distinct twinkle dances in his eye, a kind of half-amused glint that seems to convey a message. I will not confirm your burgeoning suspicion, but neither will I grant you the relief of dismissing it. He continues, describing a journey, always westward, always towards lands where rivers broaden and the fertile soil yields abundant harvests. He speaks of companions cloaked in various disguises, of precious cargo wrapped not in glittering gold, but in simple linen, and of the imperative need to assume new names at every harbor encountered. The air around them now carries the faint, earthy scent of damp wool, mingled with the wood smoke that drifts in from the cloister courtyard. A bell tolls, deep and resonant, from somewhere beyond the abbey walls, its sound a profound, round testament to time, keeping its own silent counsel. There is, of course, a poignant irony in the fact that such a story, one supposedly too vital to ever be forgotten, has endured through the ages solely in the guise of myth. If the Grail truly held not the sacred wine of communion, but rather a living lineage, its passage through history must have been entrusted to hands more pragmatic than pious, guided by individuals driven by necessity rather than by conventional sanctity. For all the poetic reverence bestowed upon it in verse and legend, one cannot help but suspect that its true custodians were far less romanticized figures, perhaps even a little burdened and grumpy about the immense responsibility thrust upon them. After all, imagine the arduous task of protecting an object, or indeed a person, that half the world dismisses as purely metaphorical. With a silent acknowledgement of the monk's profound insights, though he never once inquires about their names, the journeyers step back into the cloister's cool, encompassing air. The stars above now appear sharper, their light piercing the darkness with renewed intensity, and the candle held aloft wavers, as if acutely aware that its solitary flame is but one fragile light amidst an infinite multitude. Somewhere, perhaps secreted within a chest beneath ancient flagstones, the very cup the monk spoke of might lie hidden. Or perhaps, just as plausibly, it never graced this sacred place at all. Regardless, the Fisher King's whispered narrative has now intertwined itself with the initial profound question, and together they press forward, guiding the way into the next unseen corridor of history, illuminating a door previously unnoticed. The night air has grown cooler still, and as the threshold of the cloister is crossed, the candle's fragile flame is gently swallowed by the deeper, enveloping dark. In its wake, the stars commence their quiet, ancient work, scattered across the velvet expanse like countless flecks of parchment gold leaf. The path now leads towards a small, secluded chamber, discreetly tucked into the side of the venerable abbey. Within its confines, the air is redolent with the deep, comforting scent of cedar chests, mingled with the faint, powdery ghost of ancient vellum. It is here that the first of the genealogies is carefully unrolled. The parchment crackles delicately beneath the fingertips, akin to frost yielding to touch, each line of ink having deepened with the weight of centuries, as if the very names inscribed there have grown heavier with the relentless march of time. Initially, the document presents itself as the kind of family tree any seasoned archivist might anticipate, a predictable succession of counts, dukes, queens, and the occasional bishop, whose painted portrait seems to regard the artist with a faintly suspicious gaze. But then, with a subtle yet profound shift, the branches of this lineage begin to diverge, wandering off in increasingly strange and unexpected directions. Mainstream historians are quick to emphasize that medieval genealogies were often as much instruments of political maneuvering as they were factual records, a calculated blend of propaganda and parchment. A skilled royal scribe possessed the power to meticulously weave a bloodline to perfectly suit the immediate needs of the reigning power, grafting ancient heroes or revered biblical patriarchs onto the family tree, like carefully cultivated, ornamental fruit. Yet, within this particular document, among these curling, antique names, something truly unusual emerges, a resilient branch that steadfastly refuses to wither or die. It leaps effortlessly across geographical borders and spans vast stretches of centuries, conspicuously bypassing more celebrated rulers to meticulously trace an unbroken line of lesser-known heirs. While some researchers are inclined to dismiss such intricate connections as nothing more than mere coincidence, the inevitable overlapping tapestry of noble blood in a continent where cousins routinely married cousins and occasionally dispensed with the formality of a wedding altogether. Fringe theorists, ever alert to the faintest scent of smoke beneath the unyielding stone, passionately argue that this hidden branch has been painstakingly pruned from public records and deliberately nurtured in private ones. They propose it represents a quiet, yet utterly deliberate cultivation of a secret. Furthermore, the very names themselves, one or two of them, appear to carry distinct echoes of the Near East, awkwardly Latinized, as though they had journeyed vast distances before finally settling onto this ancient page. The script itself is remarkably fine, the ink steadfast and unwavering, strongly suggesting the hand of a scribe who possessed an intimate understanding of precisely what he was committing to history, and crucially, what he was so artfully disguising. The observer's fingers delicately traced the ancient parchment, discerning the subtle elevations where a quill had pressed firmly into the animal skin. Beyond the chamber's confines, the blustery wind rattled the window shutters, eliciting a mournful groan from a loose iron hinge with each powerful gust. Within that very atmospheric lament resided a potent reminder, both the delicate nature of paper and the intricate machinations of politics possessed an inherent fragility. Each was susceptible to being rent asunder. Each could be consumed by flames. It would, of course, prove immensely alluring to postulate that this unbroken genealogical sequence represented the precise lineage they had been diligently seeking, the fabled bloodline of Jesus, clandestinely integrated into the venerable European royal houses. Yet, The seductive whispers of temptation and the unyielding pronouncements of truth seldom converged. Certain academics continue to debate whether the presence of such decidedly Eastern appellations within established European family trees merely stemmed from Crusader-era intermarriages, a natural consequence of the intricate cultural confluence that inevitably arose when knights spent extended periods within the sophisticated Levantine courts. Conversely, other researchers propose a more clandestine interpretation that these unions served as a deliberate subterfuge, a convenient veil for concealing a heritage too sensitive or controversial to be openly acknowledged. If this latter hypothesis holds credence, then this aged parchment transcends the simple definition of a family tree. It transforms into a complex hydrological chart. Its ultimate genesis remains obscured, hidden deep within the undulating terrain of historical events, but its currents flow with sufficient clarity to be navigated, provided one is prepared to disregard official signposts and place trust in the subtle meanders of the historical stream. The candle illuminating the chamber now flickered erratically, its flame shrinking as it verged on complete extinguishment. In its fading luminescence, the ancient ink on the document appeared to undulate, not through any genuine supernatural agency, but in that peculiar human tendency for the eye to perceive something just as it is about to vanish. The parchment was rolled slowly, with extreme care, as if a hasty movement might provoke a soft, audible sigh from the aged material. As the observers retreated into the lengthy, stone-lined corridor, a profound realization dawned upon them. They were no longer proceeding in solitude. The multitude of names from the document had seemingly joined their journey, their presence a soft, continuous murmur, propelling them forward as they meticulously followed the intricate veins of history towards its next, potentially more perilous, juncture. The formidable abbey walls gradually receded from view, completely absorbed by the profound stillness of the surrounding countryside. The pathway ahead was little more than a slender ribbon of moist earth, glistening subtly beneath a delicate film of mist. The air carried the faint, earthy aroma of wet hay commingled with the distant, woodsy scent of smoke, the kind that idly ascends from chimneys when villagers possess no more pressing task than patiently awaiting a boiling pot. This unassuming track was followed until the indistinct outline of a roadside inn materialized from the encroaching darkness, its windows radiating a welcoming glow, akin to small, captured pockets of firelight. Inside, the atmosphere was a palpable blend of warmth and a slightly pungent mix of stale ale, human perspiration, and the lingering, faint tang of onions past their prime. Overhead, substantial wooden beams sagged perceptibly, deeply scarred by the cumulative effects of years of chimney smoke and boisterous, low-pitched laughter. In a secluded corner, a dog lay slumbering beneath a bench, its body occasionally twitching in dreams that seemed to involve the relentless pursuit of something perpetually just beyond its grasp. A seat was secured at a table crafted from rough-hewn timber, and an order was placed for bread, cheese, and a wine whose aged appearance seemed to predate the innkeeper's own weary smile. It was precisely within this convivial din, amidst the rhythmic creak of tankards and the scraping of boots across the floor, that an intriguing conversation was inadvertently overheard. Two men occupied an adjacent table. One possessed the deeply lined, weather-beaten countenance characteristic of a life spent predominantly outdoors, while the other exhibited the lean, fatigued physique of an individual who habitually sought the refuge of shadows. Their discourse was intentionally hushed, yet not sufficiently so to evade the attentive ears of those adept at listening without betraying their interest. They spoke in veiled terms of an unseen force, a hand operating without direct visibility, of clandestine councils whose deliberations were never officially documented, and of messages conveyed not through conventional parchment, but through the deliberate selection of which banner was hoisted above a fortress on a specific feast day. Mainstream historical academics frequently dismiss such narratives as mere popular folklore, the idle chatter originating in alehouses where veracity often becomes as diluted as the beer itself. However, a distinct intentionality permeated the manner in which these men conversed, their words artfully evading certain proper names, while circling others with the focused intensity of a hawk scrutinizing a rabbit warren. Some scholars continue to engage in rigorous debate regarding whether the dramatic political shifts of the 13th and 14th centuries, characterized by abrupt changes in alliances and the seemingly improbable resilience of particular noble houses, were simply the capricious workings of chance or, conversely, the meticulously orchestrated efforts of an organized, influential power. The prevailing academic consensus tends to favor the explanation of coincidence. Fringe researchers, however, meticulously chart these historical movements like a shadow map, postulating the existence of an invisible network that subtly guided key figures into positions of power while artfully nudging others into convenient obscurity. The elder of the two men emitted a single, sharp laugh before inclining closer to his companion. "You truly believe the Pope governs Christendom?" he queried, his voice carrying just enough resonance to reach the listener's ears. "Only when the true masters permit him to." There was no genuine amusement in his tone, merely the dry, knowing satisfaction of an individual fully aware that his words would be interpreted as drunken rambling by the majority, but not by all. At that moment, the requested bread arrived, warm and exuding a fragrant aroma, its crust audibly crackling under the fingers. The cheese proved to be sharp, almost metallic on the palate, as if it retained a memory of the blade that had portioned it. The wine, when sampled, possessed a faint, earthy taste reminiscent of iron, prompting a profound contemplation of the implications of the overheard pronouncements. If, indeed, an unacknowledged influence, be it Templar, royal, or something of even greater antiquity, truly existed, it would offer a compelling explanation for the peculiar patterns observed in the genealogies scrutinized earlier, particularly the remarkable resilience of certain lineages that appeared impervious to the ravages of plague or war. And yet, the possibility remained that the observers were merely pursuing phantoms within the smoke. Influence, by its very nature, is elusive, and the annals of history are replete with accidental occurrences that, when viewed from a distance, misleadingly assume the guise of deliberate patterns. Nonetheless, the persistent sensation endured, much like the faint aftertaste of wine lingering even after the cup is emptied, that something profoundly intentional was at work. Upon departing the inn, the mist outside had significantly intensified, rendering the road ahead into nothing more than a vague suggestion. The dog previously observed sleeping in the corner had silently followed them out, trotting discreetly at their side, as if it too harbored a curiosity about the ultimate destination of this winding path. From behind, the faint laughter of the two men could still be heard, a sound imbued with an unsettling ambiguity. It could equally be interpreted as a jest or a veiled warning. The mist continued to thicken as the journey southward progressed, their breath condensing into visible clouds in the chill air. Somewhere amidst the undulating contours of the hills ahead, Jerusalem lay slumbering, or at least the profound memory of it did. The legendary Templars had once traversed these lands, not in these damp, verdant fields, but within a city of radiant sunshine and ancient stone, where fine dust adhered to the skin and the very air was redolent with the exotic aromas of spice and oppressive heat. It was towards that historical locus that the narrative now gravitated, not by the conventional means of ship or horse, but via the deliberate, unhurried ferry of imagination. The ambient sea wind transformed, growing perceptibly warmer. The ground beneath their feet subtly shifted, morphing into the sun-baked limestone of the ancient city. And the thoroughfares, in this imaginative reconstruction, narrowed into deep shadows cast between towering, whitewashed walls. It was midday in the venerable old city, though centuries had long since passed. The vibrant hum of the bustling marketplace ascended, a symphony of commerce. Dates, pomegranates, and figs were meticulously arranged in colorful, inviting pyramids. Merchants vociferously called out their wares in a polyglot chorus of Arabic, Greek, and French. The observers imaginatively pushed through the dense throng of pilgrims until they located the formidable Templar compound, its imposing gates cast in shadow by the monumental dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a sacred site the order had famously claimed as their headquarters. Mainstream historians universally concur. The Templars were far more than mere soldiers. They were highly skilled administrators, astute bankers, and, though less frequently acknowledged, meticulous archivists. They maintained extraordinarily detailed records, the kind of documentation capable of preserving far more than simple financial ledgers. Some academics still vigorously debate whether the extensive, deep vaults situated beneath the Templars' Jerusalem base were primarily utilized for the storage of material treasure or for something far less tangible, sacred relics, invaluable documents, or perhaps even conclusive evidence of bloodlines deemed too perilous to openly acknowledge. Fringe theorists, in particular, strongly favor the latter interpretation. They envision vast, intricate corridors carved directly into the bedrock, their walls lined with robust cedar chests bound with iron, secured not by conventional locks, but by unbreakable oaths. Conceivably, within one of these chests might have reposed a genealogy of an antiquity predating Europe itself, inscribed in a language that the Crusader knights would have barely comprehended. The very walls of these subterranean vaults are reputed to maintain such a remarkably consistent temperature that one could store bread within them for weeks without it ever stalling. A factual detail perhaps less mystical in nature, yet not entirely devoid of its own subtle poetry. The air within these depths would have been cool, utterly still, and thick with the distinctive mineral scent of raw stone. Footsteps, however faint, would have echoed just enough to impart a profound sense of companionship, even to a man utterly alone. A vivid mental image formed, a knight, his armor making no sound in the intense heat, descending the steps, carefully carrying a parcel enveloped in linen. He would place it reverently inside a chest, close the lid with a soft thud, and then, before turning to depart, trace a cryptic symbol into the fine dust that coated the surface. This moment, unrecorded by any chronicler, and the object, unnamed, nevertheless felt profoundly deliberate, as if the knight intrinsically understood that the act itself would resonate through time far longer and more powerfully than any mere description of the item ever could. Ironically, the one thing the formidable Templars proved utterly incapable of safeguarding was their own precarious future. When the order was dramatically suppressed in 1307, the deep vaults beneath Jerusalem had long since fallen beyond their reach. Some adherents to the Templar legend believed they had already meticulously emptied these vaults before their final departure from the city, dispatching their most precious cargo northward and westward across Europe. Others, adopting a more skeptical stance, proposed that the fabled treasure was simply a myth, an ingenious recruiting tool, an inflated rumor strategically designed to intimidate adversaries and inspire unwavering loyalty among their ranks. Still, it remains remarkably curious how swiftly those significant vaults vanished from all official historical records, almost as if the very earth itself had conspired to seal itself over them. It remains impossible to definitively ascertain whether the specific bloodline being pursued ever traversed or resided within this particular historical site. However, if it did, then for a period it would have rested here in the profound darkness, arguably safer than within any grand cathedral, meticulously watched over by men who held secrecy in as high regard as their own salvation. As the imagined journey ascended back into the harsh glare of daylight, the sun felt excessively bright, the cacophony of the marketplace overwhelmingly loud. Yet somewhere beneath their feet, the observers continued to envision the air remaining cool and still, the chests either still perfectly in place or their very absence communicating a message just as forcefully. The pervasive mist of the observers' own century slowly returned, gradually eclipsing Jerusalem's historical sun, and once more they found themselves standing on a damp, winding road nestled within the hills. The dog from the inn had wandered ahead, its nose diligently pressed to the ground, following an elusive scent that only it could discern. The observers followed suit, pondering whether they were actively tracking the elusive currents of history, or perhaps being subtly tracked by its persistent, unseen forces. As the winding thoroughfare curved in the direction of the shoreline, it brought with it the subtle, saline aroma of the ocean, a pervasive fragrance that seemed to imbue textiles like wool and leather, to permeate the interiors of antique chests, and to infuse the tales spun by mariners who had journeyed to distances greater than they ever confessed. Within the satchel carried by the travelers rested a precise impression taken the preceding evening from an artifact discovered within a seaside sanctuary, a time-worn emblem meticulously incised into the stone lintel positioned above the entrance. Its intricate features had been rendered smooth by the passage of time and elements, save for the distinct crimson cross at its epicenter, which remained remarkably clear. The emblematic seal of the Knights Templar is widely recognized in its most prevalent iteration, depicting two armored horsemen sharing a single mount, an icon typically interpreted by historical scholars as representing either their vow of destitution, their fraternal bonds, or a combination of both principles. Nevertheless, such sigils, much like individuals, exhibited diverse forms, and in particular maritime outposts, they showcased more enigmatic motifs, interlocking rings, a sacred goblet partially obscured by a blade, or even a radiant sunburst impaled by an arrow, each variation adding to the historical enigma. Conventional academics typically account for these divergent designs as mere regional adornments, the product of artisans whose primary focus lay in gratifying their benefactors rather than adhering to a strict standard of uniformity. Conversely, proponents of more unconventional theories perceive within these variations a concealed system of mapping, where each distinct mark functions as a geographical coordinate, and every alteration serves as a vital clue. A number of these speculative thinkers even venture to propose that particular seals denote specific sites where valuable items were secreted away. Sacred artifacts, ancient charts, or even fragmented portions of a historical chronicle that, once pieced together, might unveil the authentic narrative of a significant lineage. The individual carefully manipulated the charcoal impression within their grasp, observing the delicate lines of the drawing transfer faintly onto their fingertips. The specific configuration of this particular emblem was notably unusual. The well-known cross was ensconced within a circular boundary, yet this circle was interrupted at its base by what appeared to be either a small drop or a tear-like indentation. A persistent scholarly debate continues regarding whether this peculiar motif resulted from incidental erosion over time, or if it constituted a deliberate, meaningful symbol. Numerous hypotheses proliferate. It could signify a drop of Christ's sacred blood, a clandestine emblem of a royal or divine ancestry, or perhaps simply the stonemason's momentary caprice, born from an excess of toil spent bent over his carving tool. Beyond the confines of the chapel, the relentless ocean breeze agitated a series of wooden prayer boards, their fastening cords emitting a plaintive creak in the saline atmosphere. The boards gently collided, producing a soft, rhythmic sound, akin to hushed applause for a narrative known only to them. The tactile sensation of the seal's impression was coarse and granular beneath the observer's thumb, possessing that distinctive grittiness that stubbornly persists beneath fingernails long after meticulous washing, a subtle yet persistent memento. And at this juncture, the initial hint of irony emerged, for if the seal's original intent was to obscure a secret, it had, paradoxically, transformed into a luminous guidepost for the inquisitive. The travelers recognized they were neither the inaugural individuals to meticulously trace its contours, nor would they be the final ones. The proprietor of the inn from 2 evenings prior recounted having once witnessed a Frenchman meticulously transcribing the identical design into his personal journal, murmuring words in a tongue the local inhabitants could not identify. The enigmatic Frenchman, it was noted, never made his return. Perhaps this elusive quality defines such enigmatic hints, to entice explorers into a perpetual cycle of pursuit where the allure of the subsequent revelation perpetually remains just beyond reach, compelling continuous motion. It mirrored precisely the recurring motif they had discerned within various genealogical records. The impression that an unknown agent had deliberately left a sufficient breadcrumb trail to sustain the inquiry, yet never enough to bring it to a conclusive resolution. The ocean's tide was now perceptibly advancing, the resonant roar of the incoming waves expanding to fill the crevices within the ancient chapel's walls. Amidst the fine mist that wafted through the unlatched entrance, the contours of the charcoal impression appeared to deepen and sharpen, as if the very essence of the sea intended to emphasize their significance. The individual carefully returned the rubbing to the satchel, cognizant that to bear it felt akin to aligning oneself with a dispute whose intricacies remained beyond their current comprehension. The loyal canine companion awaited them by the roadside, its tail held low, its ears acutely angled towards the expanse of the sea, as though perceiving a sound or signal that escaped human perception. They proceeded onward, their boots imprinting shallow indentations upon the moist earth. The enigmatic broken circle of the seal persistently revolving within their thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, they understood, lay the subsequent indicator, and beyond that, perhaps the fundamental rationale for the creation of all these cryptic symbols in the first instance. The thoroughfare once more constricted, this time coiling into a verdant valley where the ambient air felt notably warmer, as if the pervasive mist had dissipated sufficiently to permit a gentle infusion of golden light. The travelers proceeded past cultivated fields, delineated by low-lying stone barriers and clusters of slender poplar trees, whose foliage rustled with a sound reminiscent of ancient gossips exchanging secrets on the breeze. At the distant extremity of this valley, a stately manor house ascended, presenting a facade that was simultaneously partially fortified and partially ornamental, its towers reaching just high enough to convey an assertion of status, yet not so towering as to imply the proprietors anticipated an actual siege. Inside, the expansive main hall carried the subtle aroma of beeswax and delicate rosewater, though beneath these notes, the deeper, earthy scent of aged timber and damp masonry persisted. The elaborate hangings adorning the walls were clearly conceived to captivate visitors, rather than merely insulate against the chill, vivid, intricately detailed, replete with dynamic hunting panoramas and regal courtly processions. However, in a secluded corner, one particular tapestry diverged notably from the prevailing artistic motif. It depicted a woman shrouded in a white veil, her opulent gown richly embroidered with golden threads. She stood poised within a secluded walled garden, one hand gently resting upon a chalice, while the other remained concealed within the voluminous folds of her attire. Behind her, barely discernible and readily overlooked, a diminutive crimson cross was subtly woven into the delicate latticework of the garden's entrance gate. Orthodox art historians might interpret this depiction as an emblematic representation, perhaps as ecclesia, the personification of the ecclesiastical institution, or even as a generalized depiction of a medieval monarch. Yet unconventional theorists seldom find satisfaction in mere allegorical explanations. Some murmur that this is not a symbolic representation whatsoever, but rather a meticulously executed likeness of a specific woman, whose true identity necessitated concealment within a visual narrative deemed unthreatening for public exhibition. A segment of scholars continues to contend whether such artistic imagery could indeed have served as a vehicle for embedding covert communications in an ostensibly open manner. After all, the Knights Templar were renowned for their judicious use of discretion and indirect methods when overt pronouncements posed too great a peril. A clandestine queen, intrinsically linked by consanguinity to an ancient and venerable lineage, could conceivably have been immortalized within this very artwork, not as a documented sovereign in historical annals, but as an invented noblewoman woven into the fabric of a tapestry. The tactile sensation of the tapestry's weave was rough beneath the fingertips of the observer, who cautiously touched it when the steward's gaze was elsewhere. The colored threads emitted a subtle, earthy fragrance characteristic of ancient textiles that have been meticulously folded and unfurled across countless generations. The intricate gold thread captured the ambient illumination in such a manner that it nearly imparted a shimmering effect to the depicted chalice, as if a fluid substance were in motion within its depths. This, naturally, was merely an optical illusion, or so the individual rationalized. For to entertain a contrary belief would necessitate confronting a formidable cascade of inferences capable of dismantling a significant portion of established historical understanding concerning this era. There resided an irony here, one worthy of contemplation. If this tapestry indeed functioned as a cryptic indication, its remarkable longevity could be attributed precisely to the fact that no one ever perceived it as anything more than an aesthetic object. While vast repositories of knowledge were consumed by flames, this particular piece of woven art quietly adorned the walls of aristocratic parlors, lauded for its artistic execution, yet utterly disregarded for any deeper significance it might hold. It had endured the reigns of monarchs, devastating pestilences, and sweeping societal transformations, solely by virtue of its ornamental appeal. The steward discreetly cleared his throat, that universally recognized signal indicating that one has lingered perhaps too extensively. The individual retreated a step, offering an innocuous remark concerning the superior craftsmanship of the embroidery. The steward assented with a nod and promptly commenced a pre-prepared exposition regarding the hunting tapestries, subtly guiding the visitor away from the intriguing corner, as if no moment of significance had transpired between them. Outdoors, the sun had descended sufficiently low to cast elongated, golden-hued shadows across the entire valley. The dog patiently awaited by the entrance gate, its nose quivering subtly, as though it, too, had detected the faint trace of something concealed within those intricately woven threads. The journey continued, and although the tapestry now lay far in their wake, the spectral image of the veiled woman persisted quietly, insistently, much like a fleeting figure glimpsed within a dream that stubbornly resists fading from memory. The route through the valley ascended into loftier terrain, where the atmosphere became noticeably cooler and more invigorating, imbued with the rich, resinous aroma of pine. As late afternoon drew in, the distant horizon was majestically adorned with the pallid, rounded silhouette of a grand cathedral, its slender spire piercing the somber gray clouds like an elegant needle. Chimes resonated as the travelers drew nearer, not the comprehensive, joyous peal typical of festive occasions, but rather a measured, purposeful tolling that conveyed an impression more akin to a solemn summons than a jubilant commemoration. Inside, the vast interior of the cathedral was redolent with the mingled scents of liturgical incense and cool, damp stone, punctuated by the subtle metallic sharpness emanating from candle holders that appeared to have received more frequent polishing than the altar cloths had undergone laundering. Within a secluded side chapel, partially obscured behind an ornate marble screen, rested a glass-encased display housing an ancient scroll. Its parchment had aged to the hue of venerable bone, its margins gently curling in a manner suggestive of ancient, gnarled fingers. Adjacent to it, a precisely lettered card bore the straightforward inscription, Papal Bull 1312. Conventional historians recognize this document as Vox in Excelso, the authoritative edict through which Pope Clement V formally disbanded the Venerable Order of the Knights Templar. Its composition is characterized by meticulousness and formality, its language meticulously cloaked in the solemn attire of ecclesiastical procedure. Nevertheless, upon perusing its contents within the somber ambiance of this chapel, one is compelled to observe not merely what it articulates, But more significantly, what it conspicuously omits. There exists no unequivocal denunciation of doctrinal deviation, no direct imputation of safeguarding prescribed artifacts, no explicit enumeration of alleged transgressions. Instead, it offers only a rather uninspired assertion that the order's burgeoning notoriety and scandal had rendered its continued existence untenable. A segment of academics continues to contend whether Clement's actions were primarily motivated by apprehension regarding King Philip IV of France, who was heavily indebted to the Templars, or whether the pontiff himself harbored undisclosed information, perhaps even a covert agreement with specific knights who possessed too much sensitive knowledge. Proponents of less orthodox theories frequently envision an implicit covenant, the ostensible public obliteration of the order in exchange for the discreet preservation of its most profound and closely guarded secret. The script upon the ancient scroll was executed with painstaking precision, the pigment retaining its profound darkness even after the passage of 6 centuries. A specific passage, however, appeared almost nonchalant in its phrasing, simply stating that particular assets and individuals were to be transferred as deemed appropriate by the Holy See. This expression, as deemed appropriate, possessed a remarkable latitude, capacious enough to encompass anything from a cartload of sacred relics to an entire family placed under protective surveillance. A subtle, sardonic wit could also be discerned here, for those willing to scrutinize the text closely. Historical accounts universally depict the Knights Templar as utterly vanquished, officially disbanded, and publicly disgraced. Yet, within the obscure recesses of that very formal dissolution, it is conceivable that certain members may have departed completely unmolested, afforded protection by the very pontiff who had issued their condemnation. Administrative protocol, it would appear, possesses a remarkable efficacy as a form of concealment. The hallowed cathedral light began its slow withdrawal as the external atmosphere grew heavy with thickening clouds, the afternoon gradually surrendering to that ambiguous hour when the vibrant hues of stained glass transmute into somber, indistinct forms. Within this ancient edifice, a venerable scroll persisted in its appointed place, a fixture for many decades, perhaps even centuries, preserved behind its impeccably clean glass. Casual visitors often cast a fleeting glance, perused the accompanying descriptive card, and then continued their perambulations, drawn by the more visually arresting and colorful altarpieces. Few, indeed, paused long enough to discern the meticulously arranged folds in the aged parchment, or to detect the subtle, lingering fragrance of the beeswax seal still adhering to its surface. As the observers retreated into the vast expanse of the nave, the sonorous church bells tolled once more, their rhythm now more deliberate, the profound sound settling into the very stone of the building with the quiet absorption of water permeating parched earth. While no definitive conclusions had been reached, the experience had yielded just enough intriguing fragments of information to propel the journey forward. Such, it seemed, was the inherent nature of this particular quest. Each discovery, rather than providing a conclusive answer, invariably presented another compelling impetus to embark upon the subsequent stage. Beyond the cathedral's imposing threshold, a steadfast canine companion awaited, its form silhouetted in the lengthening shadow cast by the towering spire, ears pressed back against the encroaching wind. It glided silently into step beside the travelers, its demeanor so knowing as to suggest it had somehow deciphered the very papal bull itself. and determined that its human counterparts should not be left to ponder the profound implications in solitude. Dusk fully enveloped the party as they reached the periphery of a modest market town, one of those charming locales whose ancient cobbled thoroughfares appeared to retain the day's residual warmth, just long enough to foster the pleasant illusion that winter's chill remained a distant prospect. The sources of illumination here were not the magnificent candelabras of the cathedral, but rather humble iron cages. There emitted light a soft, buttery glow, uneven in its distribution, swaying gently with each passing gust of wind. The faint, metallic jingle of chains could be heard as diligent shopkeepers secured their shutters for the night, and a subtle, slightly acrid aroma of spilled ale wafted invitingly from a nearby tavern doorway. Their chosen destination was a tavern itself, known as the Three Pilgrims, a venerable, low-beamed inn whose ceiling was so markedly bowed by age that even the tallest among the group found it necessary to incline their heads. Its sturdy timber walls were adorned with a collection of smoke-darkened portraits, depictions of various saints, prosperous merchants, and one particularly enigmatic figure, a man with an oddly self-satisfied expression, clad in a white mantle faintly emblazoned with a red cross. The innkeeper, with a dismissive wave, insisted the man was merely an old pilgrim, but his rigid posture, coupled with his narrowed, calculating eyes, made it difficult for the observers not to envision him mentally tabulating something, perhaps a tally of coins or a list of significant names. It was here that they were scheduled to rendezvous with an archivist, not a cloistered monk or an erudite Oxford don, but a slender, energetic woman whose fingers bore the indelible marks of ink, and whose laughter resonated with the brisk, almost hurried sound of a page turning too swiftly. Her current undertaking involved meticulously tracing the convoluted fate of Templar properties in the aftermath of their suppression, a daunting endeavor she candidly admitted was akin to attempting to track an elusive fox through a dense, swirling fog. The prevailing historical consensus posits that a substantial portion of the Knights Templars' considerable wealth and extensive landholdings was subsequently transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, another formidable military order sanctioned by the Church. However, as the archivist leaned closer over mugs of warming spiced wine, she began to recount tales of peculiar anomalies, minor estates that seemed to vanish without a trace within the labyrinthine paperwork, ships purportedly bound for specific destinations that never arrived, and inventory ledgers from which entire pages had been conspicuously excised. While some conventional historians contend that such discrepancies were merely typical of the era, arguing that medieval record-keeping was notoriously imprecise, akin to the aim of an inebriated archer, a more heterodox group of fringe theorists asserts that these lacunae were entirely deliberate. They propose these gaps were the calculated outcome of a covert network that deftly moved assets beyond the pontiff's direct oversight. The archivist offered a knowing smirk as she described one particularly perplexing ledger originating from a port in La Rochelle. This document meticulously itemized provisions for 30 men and 1 passenger of importance, loaded onto a vessel that, according to official records, supposedly never departed. "Never left," she reiterated, her eyes rolling in theatrical disbelief. The ship just remained perpetually docked. Right. The investigators found their gaze returning to the smug pilgrim depicted in the painting. The subtle curve of his lips seemed to imply that he had encountered this very narrative some 6 centuries prior and had found it equally, if not more, amusing then. Beneath the sturdy oak table, the dog settled into a tight curl at their feet, its head resting comfortably on its paws. Periodically, it would lift one eye, as if discreetly confirming that its human companions were still intently absorbing the unfolding story. Outside the inn, a storm had commenced, spitting fine rain against the wooden shutters, a sound that paradoxically made the tavern's crackling fire seem even more comforting and inviting. The travelers lingered, allowing the weight of the archivist's revelations to fully permeate their thoughts. A subtle, unspoken understanding permeated the room, an almost humorous pretense that everyone present, including the taciturn innkeeper, was deliberately ignoring the palpable shift in atmosphere from convivial chatter to something far more akin to a hushed confession. While no one articulated the provocative terms bloodline or relic, their unsettling implications demonstrably hovered in the air, like an unuttered toast to clandestine histories. Upon their departure, the rain had diminished to a fine, pervasive mist. The cobbled streets, now slick and glistening, mirrored the lantern light in distorted, shimmering lines of gold. Somewhere in the distance behind them, the archivist closed her door, and the distinct, resonant sound of the iron latch falling firmly into place echoed in the quiet night. The travelers continued their journey, acutely aware of the profound significance of what she had left unsaid, as much as what she had explicitly revealed. The metaphorical trail they followed had, paradoxically, grown colder in its tangible leads, yet simultaneously more imbued with a sense of hidden life, as if they were now under the scrutiny not merely of a singular pair of eyes, but of many, some depicted in paint, some living and breathing, and perhaps others merely remembered specters of the past. By the advent of dawn, the storm had thoroughly cleansed the streets, leaving them pristine. The air was remarkably crisp, possessing a bracing quality that made each inhaled breath feel freshly minted. The party followed the winding road as it led them beyond the town's confines, where the familiar cobblestones eventually gave way to compacted earth, and the landscape unfolded into expansive fields delicately laced with frost. In the ethereal pale light of morning, every individual blade of grass appeared to be edged in shimmering silver, and their footsteps, though measured, echoed with an almost intrusive loudness, as if they were inadvertently disturbing something profoundly ancient and deeply private. Their guide for the day was a local shepherd, a man who solemnly affirmed that his family had grazed their flocks upon these very lands since a time predating the bad years. An ambiguous historical reference that, depending on his tone, could denote famine, plague, or oppressive taxation. He walked with the unhurried, rhythmic gait of one accustomed to vast distances, his shepherd's crook tapping the ground with the precise cadence of punctuation marks in a long narrative. The series of hills towards which he directed them were, to the uninitiated eye, utterly unremarkable. Merely gentle, low rises, their contours softened by centuries of continuous grass cover. Yet, to the shepherd himself, and to those who were intimately acquainted with the land, more arcane and ancient stories, these were not merely hills. They were, in fact, mounds, specifically burial mounds. The mainstream historical understanding of such formations is straightforward enough. Throughout the expansive European continent, these earthworks frequently delineate prehistoric or early medieval grave sites. Archaeologists, in their meticulous excavations, have unearthed a diverse array of artifacts beneath them, ranging from the skeletal remains of ancient warriors to the remarkably preserved hulls of entire ships. However, a more speculative fringe theory adamantly insists that, within this particular valley, at least one of these mounds conceals something far more extraordinary, not human remains, but a meticulously constructed vault. And its contents, rather than being a Viking hoard or a Saxon king's buried treasure, are believed to be documents, charters, intricate genealogies, and perhaps even seals of authority that, if brought to light, would undoubtedly render certain contemporary lineages profoundly awkward and untenable. Their shepherd guide offered a dry chuckle when this particular theory was broached, a sound like the brittle snapping of a parched twig. "Some folk," he remarked, his voice tinged with amusement. "Imagine the earth is much like a cupboard. You simply open it and retrieve whatever you desire." He, for his part, espoused a belief system passed down through generations, that the mound's true contents could only be rightfully claimed by an individual who already possessed an intrinsic knowledge of their concealed truth. A profound paradox, indeed, a secret that remains undiscoverable until it is, in essence, already known. Scholarly opinions diverge sharply on this point. Some academics dismiss the entire notion outright, emphasizing that no archaeological excavation has ever revealed such purported vaults. Conversely, other scholars argue that the very absence of concrete proof is, in fact, the crux of the matter. Either these specific mounds have yet to be properly opened, or more disturbingly, whatever was hidden within has long since been quietly removed, perhaps during the tumultuous chaos that followed the definitive fall of the Knights Templar. As the ascent continued, the verdant grass gradually gave way to exposed patches of cold, slick stone underfoot. The wind, though carrying a faint, distant scent of wood smoke from some unseen farmhouse nestled below, bore only the primal aroma of the earth itself at this higher elevation, a clean, mineral, and stubbornly mute fragrance. At the very crest of the mound, the shepherd paused, his flock of sheep grazing idly nearby, utterly oblivious to the human propensity for weaving intricate myths into every natural lump and shadow of the landscape. It was then that the observers discerned something peculiar, a distinct circle of smaller stones, meticulously embedded in the ground, scarcely visible unless struck by the sun's precise angle. They presented the spectral appearance of a vanished structure. Perhaps an ancient waymarker guiding forgotten travelers, perhaps a communal hearth long extinguished, or perhaps the investigators mused with a flicker of dry, dark humor. They were simply medieval real estate boundary markers, humorously proclaiming, "Vault begins here. Trespassers prosecuted." The shepherd, with an almost ritualistic respect, did not step within the confines of the stone circle. Neither did the travelers. Instead, they stood at its precipice, enveloped by the uncanny stillness that pervaded the ancient site. There was no cheerful birdsong, no buzzing hum of insects, only the soft, rhythmic shuffle of the grazing sheep and the long, empty sigh of the wind. From this elevated vantage point, the panorama stretched for miles, punctuated by distant church spires and intricate hedgerows. It was effortless to envision someone from centuries past, deliberately choosing this precise location for its strategic outlook, for the way the first rays of sunrise would gild the expansive land below, much like a painter's brushstroke. Far more challenging, however, was to imagine that they had intended for those standing there now in the present, to ponder whether beneath their very boots lay a truth too delicate and profound to ever be exposed to the light of day. As they began their descent, a small, intricate carving caught their attention on a stone partially buried in a cushion of moss, a crude cross, its arms unevenly rendered, with the lower limb notably longer than the others. This distinctive shape, they intuitively sensed, would reappear in their journey, though not in the manner or location they might anticipate. That uneven cross remained imprinted upon their minds, much like a half-remembered melody. They refrained from speaking of it immediately, as if giving it a name might somehow shatter the subtle spell of the place. Instead, they allowed the winding road to carry them onward, towards the lower-lying lands where river mist ascended in pale, ethereal ribbons, and the melancholic tolling of church bells resonated without any visible hands to set them in motion. The town they eventually entered possessed the weary, resigned grace of a place that had borne witness to the rise and fall of countless regimes. Long, curling scrolls of peeling plaster detached themselves from ancient facades, revealing layers of brick and stone even older still. There was a central square, a functional fountain, and a formidable church whose massive doors conveyed a distinct reluctance to be opened. Inside the venerable church, the air was heavy and redolent with the commingled scents of beeswax and ancient stone dust. The mainstream historical record asserts that this particular church was constructed in the late 12th century by Cistercian monks, a monastic order renowned for their austere lifestyle, their distinctive plain white habits, and their exceptional aptitude for land management. However, it is precisely here that the fringe narrative subtly wedges its way into the established account. The altar within this church is not situated where it conventionally ought to be. Instead of resting squarely beneath the apse, it is noticeably offset, almost as if it had been deliberately repositioned to either conceal or, conversely, to reveal something else entirely. Some deeply ingrained local traditions insist that the original builders meticulously aligned the entire structure to correspond with specific celestial events. Others whisper of an even older foundation existing beneath the nave, potentially predating any Christian presence in this location. Scholars, in their ongoing debates, argue heatedly over whether this irregular architectural layout constitutes evidence of multiple construction phases, a simple instance of human error in design, or most provocatively, a calculated act of deliberate concealment. The scene unfolds beneath the subdued illumination of a solitary candle, its flame flickering gently at a peripheral altar. There, etched into the venerable timber of a confessional door, the distinctive uneven cross reappears. Its familiar elongated lower arm and unrefined carving are unmistakable, yet so subtly rendered as to be nearly imperceptible unless illuminated by a fortuitous beam of light. Those observing exchanged silent, knowing glances, a shared unspoken question hanging in the chilled air. Was this merely happenstance, or did it signify a deliberate, persistent pattern? Their steps then led them into an adjacent side chapel, where the atmosphere was noticeably cooler, as if the ancient stone walls themselves were sighing. High above, a breathtaking stained glass window captured not a traditional sacred narrative, but rather the striking image of a ship, its billowing sail emblazoned with a prominent red cross. The intricate craftsmanship was so meticulous that an astute observer might readily identify it with specific 14th century cogs, vessels historically known to have embarked from La Rochelle, that pivotal French port, which served as the Knights Templars' final significant stronghold before their formidable order ultimately fragmented. The allure of a clandestine armada, purportedly laden with invaluable relics and sacred archives, clandestinely departing under the cloak of darkness for havens well beyond the dominion of papal authority, proves a powerfully romantic notion. Indeed, certain unconventional historians fervently propose that these elusive vessels successfully navigated to distant shores, with some positing their arrival in Scotland, others in Portugal, and a remarkably audacious hypothesis even charting their course to the New World, predating Columbus's voyages by several centuries. Yet, a touch of playful skepticism inevitably surfaces, prompting a consideration of how many such ships, despite their iconic Red Cross sails, might have simply transported prosaic consignments of salted fish and other everyday commodities, their journeys imbued with nothing more enigmatic than the usual ebb and flow of commerce and the age-old tales of the sea. Nevertheless, the very atmosphere of the chapel continues to resonate with a subtle, almost imperceptible thrum, as if the ancient edifice itself cradles the hushed anticipation of some profound, long-interred revelation. The local parish caretaker, an elderly gentleman whose pronounced stoop spoke volumes of a lifetime spent in diligent service, perhaps sweeping countless floors, eventually discovered the observers lingering within the chapel. When the subject of the distinctive ship depicted in the stained glass arose, he offered a dismissive shrug, explaining it away as merely an antiquated family crest belonging to a long-departed benefactor. Yet, his vocal inflection carried the faintest, almost imperceptible upward lilt, a subtle nuance that was just sufficient to ignite a suspicion that he did not entirely subscribe to his own casual explanation. As they departed, the pervasive mist had noticeably intensified, its ethereal tendrils now enveloping and obscuring the distant boundaries of the town's square. Simultaneously, the resonant peal of the church bells commenced once more, despite the conspicuous absence of anyone visible attending to the belfry ropes. Far off, deep within the valley they had traversed that morning, a flock of sheep stirred restlessly upon a rise of earth, a mound whose true nature remained tantalizingly ambiguous, perhaps a forgotten grave, a concealed vault, or simply an unremarkable natural formation. The encroaching mist continued its silent pursuit, an unbidden companion steadfastly refusing any formal introduction. Upon reaching the subsequent village, the mist had intensified to an almost palpable density, resembling a cool, damp shawl delicately draped across the contours of the earth. The thoroughfares here were noticeably constricted, and the roofs of the dwellings were set lower, creating an impression that the houses themselves were inclining inward, conspiratorially sharing long-held secrets. A distinct sound reached their ears before its source came into view. The deliberate, rhythmic creak of a mill wheel, relentlessly turning on the adjacent stream, its wooden paddles producing a steady slap against the water in a cadence that felt older than recorded memory. This ancient symphony inexorably drew them toward a humble, low-lying bridge, where the pungent aroma of wet moss and oxidized iron commingled with the subtle, comforting wisp of wood smoke. This particular locality laid claim to a rich historical tapestry. Official chronicles attested to its past function as a crucial staging post for devout pilgrims embarking upon the arduous journey towards Santiago de Compostela. It was a modest way station, offering a secure resting place and simple provisions like a few loaves of bread. Yet the more unconventional narratives, the fringe whispers, hinted at a deeper significance, that certain pilgrims conveyed more than mere walking sticks and prayer beads, carrying instead encrypted messages embedded within the symbolic language carved onto roadside crosses and various markers. They entered a diminutive tavern, its robust overhead beams not artificially darkened, but rather deeply stained to a rich ebony by centuries of pervasive smoke. The interior exuded a comforting blend of yeast and oak, while the sturdy tables bore the unmistakable patina of age, their surfaces worn to a smooth sheen by countless elbows that had rested upon them through generations. Behind the well-worn counter, a woman with tresses resembling a shimmering silver braid of river water meticulously poured a wine that offered a subtle, delightful hint of plums on the palate. Scholars engage in discourse regarding the possibility that such establishments might have functioned as unofficial nodes within an intricate, encrypted communication network. The prevailing historical consensus often dismisses such notions, typically scoffing at the lack of concrete evidence beyond a handful of unusually marked doorframes. However, proponents of unconventional theories frequently highlight the persistent recurrence of specific carvings. A precisely rendered compass rose, a hand with two fingers deliberately extended, and a stylized fish whose tail pointed enigmatically toward some unseen objective. In a quiet corner of the tavern, etched into a sturdy beam positioned just above head height, the familiar symbol materialized once more, the uneven cross. It was neither painted nor intended as a mere decorative flourish, but rather appeared to have been cut directly into the timber with a raw, almost contemporary impatience. The elongated lower arm dipped subtly, conveying the impression that its originator was less concerned with precise symmetry and more with simply establishing a discernible presence. A shared, knowing chuckle arose among them at the thought. How many other individuals, similarly inclined toward speculative narratives, might have occupied this very spot, their gazes fixed upon the identical notch in the ancient wood, each weaving it into an elaborate saga of concealed riches and clandestine histories? One ponders the alternative. Perhaps a local artisan, a miller perhaps, carved it absent-mindedly on a dreary, rain-swept afternoon, and now, centuries later, it inexplicably serves as an irresistible magnet for their own intricately layered hopes and theories. The proprietor of the tavern recounted a tale of a venerable stone bridge situated just beyond the village periphery, a place where the main thoroughfare appeared to diverge. Her description was accompanied by a subtle half-smile, imbuing the narrative with a sense that the road itself was not merely splitting, but rather purposefully bending toward some undisclosed objective. Following her precise instructions, the observers located the structure, an ancient crossing whose robust arches gracefully ascended like the rounded backs of colossal, slumbering animals. The watercourse flowing beneath was notably shallow, yet the individual stones forming the bridge were undeniably massive, attributed to Roman engineering by conventional historical accounts, though some scholars contend they were, in fact, repurposed from an even more ancient site. Beneath the venerable structure, specifically on its upriver flank, a carving became visible, partially obscured and consumed by clinging moss. It depicted another ship, though this one was noticeably smaller, featuring a solitary square sail. Intriguingly, its prow was oriented directly upriver, resolutely facing away from the distant sea. Unconventional theories revel in such specificities, prompting the question of why a ship would be depicted facing inland, unless it constituted an element of a broader symbolic cartography, a metaphorical chart hinting at expeditions not across vast oceans, but rather deep into the very heart of the land itself. Conversely, conventional wisdom attributes such an image to a mere mason's caprice, deeming it no more significant than an idle doodle adorning the margin of an ancient manuscript. They traversed the bridge with deliberate slowness, their footsteps muffled by the pervasive dampness. The pervasive mist pressed in intimately, gradually softening the contours of the world, until only the gentle murmur of flowing water and a faint, almost metallic tang in the air remained discernible. Beyond the bridge, the thoroughfare did indeed bifurcate, one branch ascending towards the distant hills, the other plunging into a forest so intensely dense that the discernible path vanished after but a few tentative steps. They opted for the shadowed embrace of the forest, though a persistent intuition whispered that the uneven cross would undoubtedly await them somewhere ahead, perhaps carved into ancient bark or weathered stone, seemingly grinning at their unwavering readiness to pursue the elusive trails indicated by the shadows. The sylvan expanse enveloped them with a gradual, almost deliberate embrace, akin to a slow, profound inhale, its overarching branches intricately weaving together overhead until the sky above diminished to a faint, ethereal memory. Each deliberate step sank into the damp, hushed carpet of leaf mold, the atmosphere around them rich with the earthy, potent perfume of natural decay and recent rain. From an unseen vantage point, a woodpecker meticulously maintained a rhythm against a hollow trunk, its staccato tapping resonating like the polite yet insistent knock of an enigmatic messenger who steadfastly refused to reveal his identity. Their progression followed what felt less like a defined path and more like an intuitive suggestion, the subtle guidance the land imparts solely to those who have cultivated the art of listening. The arboreal inhabitants of this place were ancient, their forms gnarled and wide at the base, with bark that folded and furrowed, reminiscent of the leathery skin of venerable time-worn hands. And upon one such formidable trunk, the uneven cross was once again discovered. This iteration of the mark was noticeably deeper, conveying an impression that its carver had been endowed with both a clear sense of purpose and ample time for its meticulous execution. Conventional historical accounts indicate that this particular forest once served as an esteemed royal hunting ground, reserved for a medieval count who meticulously levied taxes on every boar and stag successfully harvested from its verdant depths. However, esoteric folklore and fringe narratives posit that these very royal hunts frequently served as a convenient pretext, ingeniously concealing other, more clandestine pursuits, surreptitious meetings between knights and itinerant pilgrims, who, it is suggested, functioned more as discreet couriers than as devout penitents. Some theorists even conjecture that valuable goods, perhaps even precious artifacts, were ingeniously secreted here in plain sight, artfully disguised as mundane provisions or ordinary cargo destined for the bustling kitchens of the Count's formidable castle. The academic dispute among scholars regarding these competing narratives is notably vigorous. Those advocating for caution emphatically declare such claims absurd, pointing out the conspicuous absence of verifiable proof beyond mere tavern gossip and the embellishments of later romantic novels. Yet, a counter-argument is frequently advanced by those who highlight the persistent and inexplicable recurrence of these very same distinctive symbols: the uneven cross, the ship resolutely facing inland, appearing in geographical locales where the official influence or documented presence of the Knights Templar should, by all reasonable historical expectation, never have extended. They paused within a modest clearing where the terrain gently sloped, forming a natural shallow bowl. The profound silence permeating this spot was truly extraordinary, possessing a quality so absolute that it rendered one acutely aware of the rhythmic thrum of their own pulse. At its very heart, a substantial stone slab rested horizontally, its ancient surface elegantly mottled with patches of variegated lichen. To their considerable surprise, delicate lines were etched into its surface, a series of concentric circles, almost perfectly mimicking the ephemeral ripples that spread across a tranquil body of water. A subtle, private jest passed among them, a wry thought that perhaps this was merely the world's most antiquated cheese board, inadvertently abandoned after a forgotten night's picnic. Yet, a compelling recollection stirred. These very circles brought to mind earlier observations, those enigmatic patterns embedded within the chapel floor back in the coastal town. The ones they had previously suspected were far more than mere decorative embellishments. The surrounding atmosphere seemed to grow denser, charged with that peculiar stillness that perpetually hovers precariously between the precipice of profound revelation and the mundane comfort of simple dismissal. They carefully cleared away a portion of the encroaching moss, and beneath it discovered a channel, remarkably slender, cut with precision into the stone's very edge, as if specifically designed to capture water or some other flowing liquid. Was it a stone for ritual libations, an ancient altar, or merely a highly inefficient bird bath? As this discussion unfolded, a sudden gust of wind swept through the surrounding trees, dislodging a delicate shower of droplets. The resulting sound was exquisitely delicate, almost like a soft, whispered applause. It served as a poignant reminder that they were never the first to stand upon this hallowed ground. Countless others had knelt, stood, whispered their theories, and eventually departed, each carrying their own unique interpretations into the ever-thickening fog of history. From this vantage point, the indistinct path once more diverged, one branch leading inexorably deeper into the shadowed, enigmatic forest, the other curving towards a faint, promising glimmer of light. Opting to pursue the faint illumination, they continued onward, and the forest gradually receded, its dense canopy thinning until they ultimately emerged upon a ridge overlooking a narrow, verdant valley. Below, a serpentine ribbon of water meandered gracefully between cultivated fields, its surface catching the pale, hesitant sun. And there, partially concealed by the river's gentle curve, stood a formidable structure of stone and slate, a mill noticeably larger than the one encountered in the preceding village. A ponderous wheel turned with a slow, deliberate cadence, and for a strange, fleeting moment, it felt as though they had not merely traversed space, but had somehow circled back through time. They collectively decided to descend into the valley. As the journey led them downwards, the pervasive aroma of the forest canopy gradually yielded to the crisper, invigorating fragrance of river water. The mill wheel, a venerable contraption, continued its age-old cadence of creaking, but now its familiar sound was complemented by the incisive tap of chisels striking stone, indicating an active presence. Drawing nearer, they observed an elderly man, momentarily pausing his meticulous task of shaping a stone block. His gaze, the color of glacial stream ice, met theirs, his hands a testament to years of toil, scored and hardened by his craft. He evinced no astonishment at their appearance. "You're following the marks," he stated, his voice devoid of interrogative inflection, as if merely articulating an obvious truth. They exchanged a quick, silent look. The ethereal mist that had enveloped them moments ago seemed to persist, not in the ambient air, but in the subtle, unspoken space between his words and their own pondering thoughts. The experienced mason then laid aside his tool, beckoning them to follow him into the interior of the mill. The atmosphere within transformed immediately, becoming distinctly cooler, permeated by a composite aroma of pulverized rock, damp lumber, and the subtle piquancy of milled cereals. Light, sifting through slender apertures in the walls, transmuted the myriad dust particles into languidly descending celestial bodies. Outside, the great wheel rumbled on in its ceaseless rotation, a sound akin to the enduring breath of some colossal, ancient creature that had resided there for centuries. Their attention was drawn to a series of carvings, understated and almost tentatively inscribed along the wooden beams. Initially, they appeared to be commonplace impressions left by tools. However, upon closer scrutiny, certain shapes manifested repeatedly: an asymmetrical crucifix, a vessel with its sails furled, and notably new this time, a stellar emblem within a circular frame. This last symbol seized their attention with a sudden gasp of recognition. They had encountered its spectral presence before, concealed within the chapel floor back on the coast, and delicately inscribed on the stone tablet in the forest clearing. Conventional historical accounts widely assert that these mills represented the vital nucleus of rural existence, typically owned by regional gentry and operated by proficient artisans, much like their present host. Yet, certain heterodox claims posit that some mills, particularly those strategically situated along crucial aquatic arteries, functioned as observation points, locations where encrypted communications could be discreetly exchanged, perhaps with a handful of grain or a fragment of vellum concealed within a flour sack. One such theory even ventures to propose that some millers were, in fact, covert members of the Knights Templar, meticulously monitoring provisions intended for expeditions that were never meant to be formally documented. The academic contention surrounding these assertions is, predictably, foreseeable. Romantic nonsense, grumble the archivists who steadfastly insist on documentary evidence, more credible than generally perceived. Retort those who have meticulously mapped these milling establishments along a mysterious configuration that strikingly parallels ancient pilgrimage and commercial arteries. The mason observed their delicate exploration of the symbols with their fingertips. "Old," he remarked, his tone dispassionate. "Older than me. Older than this building itself." His delivery was as unembellished as remarking on atmospheric conditions. He then led them towards a humble entrance at the rear of the chamber. The hinges emitted a gentle screech as it opened, disclosing a constricted staircase that descended into chilling gloom. As they made their way lower, the air grew moist, bearing a subtle aroma of ferrous minerals and alluvial earth. Their footfalls reverberated, not with a keen resonance, but in a muffled, cushioned manner, as though the sound were muted by the very walls. At the bottom, they discovered a compartment no larger than a rustic dwelling. Its walls were adorned with stone ledges. Many were empty, but in one corner reposed a small, venerable, grime-laden casket. The securing mechanism was absent. The cover yielded readily. Inside, an assortment of fluvial pebbles lay, each incised with a distinct emblem. The stellar motif within the circular frame was present, as was the asymmetrical crucifix. However, there were others entirely unfamiliar to them: volutes, trigons, and an ichthyic appendage. They jested, seeking to alleviate the oppressive atmosphere of the room, that perhaps it was an ancient board game, one that must have been utterly tedious to engage with, if it necessitated a subterranean chamber and absolute confidentiality. But the mason maintained a somber expression. He selected a specific pebble, depicting a vessel oriented towards the interior, and entrusted it to their care. "This one," he murmured softly, "invariably returns. Regardless of its trajectory, inexplicably it gravitates back to this spot." His gaze wavered momentarily, and for an instant, they believed they perceived the same expression of subtle amusement, mingled with cautious reserve they had observed in the mariner at the coastal town's harbor. A sudden draft of wind caused the apertures upstairs to clatter, and the hypnotic rotation of the mill wheel recommenced its deep rumble. They recollected the stone tablet in the woodland, the intricately inscribed sanctuary pavement, and the ancient manuscript lacking a leaf. Disparate strands of information that had seemed unconnected now began to coalesce, though into what overarching design they were unable to articulate. The mason did not prevent their appropriation of the stone, nor did he inquire about their identities. He merely resumed his task with the chisel, the cadence of his labor merging seamlessly with the grinding mechanism's profound drone. As they emerged into the open air, the river shimmered with argent luminescence, and the atmosphere bore a faint, familiar aroma of rosemary, as if from a concealed horticultural space. They proceeded along the watercourse in a downward direction. The mill wheel's sound diminished, superseded by the gentle sibilance of water lapping against pebbles. In the distance, on the far shore, a span came into view, curvilinear and constricted, its stones mottled by antiquity. From their vantage point, it appeared to be merely a means of traversal. But as the light source altered its position, obscurities materialized along its side, and then they perceived it. The asymmetrical crucifix incised marginally above the liquid surface, where only those who possessed the requisite knowledge to perceive would ever notice. They advanced cautiously towards the bridge. The stone cooled beneath their hands, where the sun had not yet impinged upon it. The watercourse's soft sound intensified here, reverberating beneath the span in a resonance that seemed almost intentional, as though the edifice itself emitted a low, constant hum. The aroma was a blend of bryophytes, damp cement, and something subtly ferrous from the water's gradual erosion against iron-rich stone. Positioned centrally on the bridge, they could now discern the uneven cross with greater clarity. Its lines were unrefined, yet not negligently executed, the incisions made sufficiently profound to endure for ages. A halcyon bird streaked by, exhibiting vibrant azure and fiery ochre hues, and they tracked its trajectory to the opposite shore, where a constricted trail meandered into the trees. Conventional historical accounts would widely assert that medieval bridges represented wonders of public infrastructure, connecting territories for commerce and transit. This was indeed quite accurate. But certain heterodox hypotheses subtly suggested that some bridges were beyond mere points of passage. They were indicators within a concealed geodetic framework of influence, situated at junctures where telluric energy pathways converged, or where fluvial flows might transport encrypted consignments downstream without inciting apprehension. This specific span, if one subscribes to the interpretations of heterodox cartographers, is situated upon a trajectory linking a literal bastion to a dilapidated monastery in the interior, both purported to have been possessions of the Knights Templar prior to their dissolution. Some historians deride this conjunction as mere happenstance, citing innumerable ancient crossings devoid of comparable enigmatic reverberations. Others retort by referencing old ecclesiastical documents, hinting at philanthropic benefactors whose names were deliberately concealed and whose heraldic devices displayed, yes, an asymmetrical crucifix. On the far bank, the trail constricted further, and the arboreal covering densified, transforming natural illumination into a diffused, verdant mist. The atmosphere carried the scent of moist cortex and bruised pteridophytes. Underfoot, the soil became yielding, and they heard the sporadic groan of hidden boughs overhead. The pebble in their garment, the vessel oriented towards the interior, now registered as more temperate, though perhaps that was merely from the warmth of their grasp. They encountered a fallen boundary marker, its engraving weathered into something that could be interpreted as ancient numerical characters, or as another of those unrecognized emblems from the clandestine receptacle within the mill. They recorded the observation, conceptually placing it with the coiled motifs and ichthyaic appendages. A curve in the trail led them to an open space, and centrally positioned within it stood a pillar of eroded calcareous rock of human height. It was topped by a simple sculpture, a stellar emblem within a circular frame. They had previously observed this in the sanctuary pavement, on the mill's structural timber. But here it existed in isolation, unconfined by architectural enclosure. Bryophytes ascended its flanks, and formica ingress and egressed from its minute cracks like a languid, intentional inscription. They were compelled to acknowledge the paradox that infiltrated their thoughts. Centuries of monarchs, pontiffs, and ecclesiastical interrogators. And yet this tranquil sylvan marker still endures, its arcana vulnerable only to atmospheric currents and myrmekine activity. The academic debate over such upright markers was as polarized as the discourse surrounding the spans. Were they demarcation pillars for neglected properties, navigational markers for covert pathways, or merely the remnants of an extinct popular custom unconnected to any chivalric fraternity? The column provided no elucidation, only its unyielding existence. From its rear emanated an auditory sensation, not the whisper of air currents or the vocalizations of avians, but something metrical and gentle, like fabric abrading rock. They circumambulated, discovering an aged female positioned upon a planar stone, fabricating a mesh from rough cannabis fiber. Her gaze rapidly shifted towards them, then to the pebble they possessed, and without verbal remark, she resumed her task. Following a brief interval, she articulated, seemingly not addressing them, but rather the sylvan environment itself. It only works if you follow the water. They cast their gaze towards the watercourse, which manifested at this point as a constricted, rapidly flowing rivulet. The female's digits maintained ceaseless motion, knot after knot, with the same deliberate cadence as the mill wheel and the stone carver's tool. They expressed their gratitude, though uncertain as to the reason for their appreciation, and retreated towards the trail. Upon their departure, the subtle aroma of rosemary reappeared, an incongruous scent within the dense forest, recalling to their minds the horticultural space unseen at the milling establishment. Ahead, the trail descended sharply towards the rivulet. Further along the watercourse reposed the monastery indicated by the heterodox cartography. Further along the current's origin, perhaps, lay the elucidation for why each route and every symbol seemed to be compelling their progression towards the interior. They proceeded along the winding rivulet towards its source, the auditory quality intensifying from a gentle sibilance to an animated babble. The liquid's expanse intercepted shafts of solar illumination, transforming them into ephemeral fragments of mercury that disappeared instantly upon attempts to focus their vision. Their footwear partially submerged within the moist soil, every stride attended by the soft suction of ground yielding with resistance. At this elevation, the atmosphere transformed, more pristine, less dense, and imbued with the aroma of conifer sap heated by solar radiation. At a considerable distance in front, they heard the resonant impact of aqueous descent upon a lithic surface, the indication of a minor waterfall. Amidst the boles of coniferous and deciduous trees, they perceived fleeting views of what appeared to be stonework, pallid, rectilinear blocks, excessively regular to be naturally formed. Mainstream historical narratives typically assert that following the dramatic dissolution of the Knights Templar in 1307, their considerable assets were either confiscated by the monarchy or systematically transferred into the custody of the rival Hospitaller order. Official chronicles meticulously itemize each parcel of land, every consecrated edifice, and all industrial installations, such as watermills, assigning them to new ownership with bureaucratic precision. However, a persistent undercurrent of alternative accounts posits that not all possessions were relinquished. Some holdings, these fringe theories contend, were cleverly concealed in plain sight, masquerading as secluded hermitages, charitable hospice houses, or even remote forestry outposts nestled deep within untamed territories where governmental oversight was minimal. Certain established academics vehemently reject such notions, arguing that if such clandestine sites genuinely existed, demonstrable evidence beyond mere conjecture and a handful of ambiguous maps would surely have surfaced. Yet, other more open-minded researchers highlight peculiar lacunae in royal land surveys, unaccounted for acreage, unlisted structures, suggesting that what is conspicuously absent from the official record might, in fact, be more revealing than what is explicitly documented. The cascading waterfall finally materializes before them, a majestic, two-tiered torrent plummeting over ancient limestone ledges into a tranquil, emerald-hued pool. Directly behind this aqueous curtain, a dark chasm gapes, a modest cavern entrance. The fine, invigorating spray from the falls gently mists their countenances, providing a refreshing coolness to their skin, while the subtle, earthy perfume of damp stone delicately permeates their senses. Their approach is undertaken with deliberate caution, as the surrounding rocks are notoriously treacherous, their surfaces made slick by the constant moisture. A delicate film of moss yields softly beneath their footfalls, emitting the faintest, almost imperceptible sigh. Once inside the confines of the cave, the thunderous crescendo of the falls transforms into an unceasing, pervasive roar, so constant and enveloping that it paradoxically begins to assume the quality of profound silence. The cavern's walls press in closely, their surfaces glistening and deeply corrugated. As their vision gradually adapts to the dim interior, they discern an intricate etching positioned just above the waterline. Another familiar circular motif encircling a star, identical to the one observed on the forest column, the chapel's flagstone floor, and the sturdy millbeam. Here, however, it is accompanied by an additional element: 3 parallel lines ascending obliquely, resembling a rudimentary depiction of steps or perhaps even waves. They are reminded of the enigmatic pronouncement uttered by the woman, "It only functions if you pursue the water's course." Perhaps her instruction referred to journeying upstream to this very location, or conceivably still further beyond, to wherever this distinctive pattern ultimately leads. A subtle, almost ironic realization begins to dawn. The formidable Knights Templar, renowned as masters of imposing fortresses and extensive naval fleets, had chosen to obscure their secrets behind nothing more formidable than a waterfall, a natural barrier that even a child could easily navigate. There was no armed sentinel, no ponderous, fortified gate, merely the enduring elements of stone, flowing water, and the tenacious persistence of a symbol reiterated across diverse terrains. Somewhere within the dimly lit, dripping interior, a faint, metallic resonance seems to register, akin to the soft clinking of a chain brushing against solid rock. It occurs once, then dissipates, immediately supplanted by the gentle gurgle of water seeping through the interstitial spaces between the stones. They stoop to scrutinize the intricate carving more intimately, their fingertips tracing the worn grooves in the stone. Here, the rock surface feels unexpectedly warmer, despite the dampness of their hands. A shallow indentation is discovered directly beneath the symbol, and within this depression, partially obscured by fine silt, rests what appears to be a fragment of pottery or a smoothly polished shard of glass. It catches the attenuated light filtering in from the exterior pool in a manner that strongly suggests deliberate placement rather than mere happenstance. Without conscious thought, the shard is carefully placed into a pocket, and they withdraw towards the cavern's entrance. Outside, the stream persists in its upward trajectory, now considerably narrower, weaving its way through a constricted cleft in the hillside. The ambient air here carries the faint, almost imperceptible aroma of wood smoke, too subtle to emanate from any nearby encampment, more akin to the lingering specter of fires long extinguished. As they ascend alongside the meandering stream, with the diminishing sound of the falls receding behind them, they are unable to shake the profound conviction that these recurring symbols are less a straightforward path to be followed than an intricate lexicon to be mastered, and that perhaps, just perhaps, they are still merely articulating its foundational characters. The ascending stream diminishes to little more than a shimmering silver thread, gracefully skipping over stones that bear a striking resemblance to the weathered vertebrae of some long-interred colossus. Statito. The dense arboreal canopy begins to thin overhead, and they emerge into a sunlit clearing where the ambient light possesses an almost preternatural concentration, as though the very air itself has been distilled into pure luminescence. At the precise center of this clearing stands a low rectangular stone trough, into which a continuous trickle of water flows from a slender spout meticulously carved into a solid block. The sound is gentle, yet remarkably persistent, evocative of the patient. Rhythmic tapping of someone utterly convinced that their summons will eventually be answered. The trough, its interior is coated with a delicate film of verdant algae, causing the water, surface to gleam with a mesmerizing green-gold iridescence under the direct sunlight. Conventional historical texts would undoubtedly classify this structure as a lavadero, a communal wash basin ubiquitous in rural European communities well into the modern epoch. The functional rationale behind its existence is immediately apparent. Yet its presence here, situated far removed from any extant or historical settlement, renders its practical utility almost suspiciously convenient. Fringe researchers, however, circulate hushed theories regarding hidden Templar baptistries, cunningly disguised as mundane wash places, serving a dual purpose as both sacred ritual fonts and covert rendezvous points for those initiated into their secret fraternity. Some mainstream historians have summarily dismissed such notions as mere romanticized fantasy. Templars had no need for clandestine fonts, one academic scoffed during a lecture they once attended. Their baptisms were unequivocally Catholic, publicly performed, and entirely orthodox in every respect. Nevertheless, more circumspect voices within the academic community concede that a select few medieval water features do indeed bear enigmatic markings whose placement appears to be more profoundly symbolic than purely decorative. They approach the carved spout. Its stone block is noticeably streaked with mineral deposits, presenting a white and chalky appearance. Beneath this encrustation, they discern a faint inscription, significantly eroded by the passage of time, yet still decipherable if one angles their head precisely against the light. This time, it is not Latin, but a complex, interwoven tapestry of characters, some distinctly Greek, others clearly runic, and still others bearing an uncanny resemblance to ancient Phoenician script. The slender stream of water catches upon these symbols, causing each one to glisten momentarily, as if subtly underscoring its own significance. A finger is run along the grooves, and they perceive a faint, almost sharp resistance against the skin, more pronounced than mere natural weathering should permit. The prevailing scent here is a paradoxical blend of pristine cleanliness and deep earthiness, wet stone, verdant moss, and a subtle, almost sweet aroma emanating from the water itself, which leads them to suspect its source lies far beneath the ground. Cupping their hands, they partake of the water. It is unexpectedly frigid, almost startlingly so, and leaves a distinct metallic tang upon the tongue, reminiscent of water that has long reposed in contact with iron. A quiet, wry thought spontaneously occurs: how many vast conspiracies, they ponder, might have originated in precisely this manner. A solitary sip from a mysterious spring in a forgotten forest, followed by the compelling, almost intoxicating conviction that this particular water was intended for their consumption alone. Adjacent to the trough, a low wall describes an almost perfect arc. It now encloses nothing but natural grass and vibrant wildflowers, yet its precise curvature is unmistakable, a perfect half-circle, evocative of the apse of a church, but here, open entirely to the expanse of the sky. The stones are expertly fitted together without the aid of mortar, their edges smoothly worn as if they have been repeatedly handled, perhaps even polished by countless hands clasped in prayer. A crow's sharp call suddenly pierces the profound quiet from a nearby branch, its sound abrupt and attention-grabbing. They then notice a flat, unassuming slab resting at the furthest extremity of the wall. It bears the familiar circle and star motif once more, this time accompanied by the 3 ascending lines, and an intriguing new detail: a crescent moon delicately tucked into the lower curve of the arc. They mentally recall the symbol found in the cave, on the mill beam, and within the chapel floor. Each iteration has either incorporated or omitted an element, as though the emblem itself is undergoing a subtle evolution with every new location it is discovered. Perhaps it functions as a map indeed, but not a geographical one. Rather, a map delineating a progressive journey of initiation. From beyond the graceful curve of the half-circle wall, the sound of water noticeably deepens, indicating a slower, more substantial movement than the lively stream they have been tracking. They step past the wall, through the tall grass, and the ground gently slopes away into a deeply shaded hollow where a tranquil pond lies motionless, its surface as still as a polished mirror. Its expanse is delicately strewn with fallen pine needles, yet here and there, patches of clear water perfectly reflect the sky above, creating the illusion that the pond is cradling fragments of the day itself. A distinctive structure is discernible at its distant edge, a small arched doorway built directly into the sloping bank, its lintel barely rising above the water's placid surface. The perfect reflection in the pond doubles this entrance, causing it to appear as a complete circular opening hidden within the earth. The air within this hollow is noticeably cooler, and the scent of damp stone is more pronounced, once again tinged with a faint metallic undertone. A solitary dragonfly hovers delicately above the water, the almost imperceptible rustle of its wings so soft it seems barely real, like the hushed turning of paper in a silent library. Somewhere behind them, the crow emits another call, sharper this time, as if insistently urging them onward. They crouch at the pond's edge, their boots sinking slightly into the yielding, damp earth, and intently study the arched doorway positioned across the water. The stones comprising this archway are considerably darker, their surfaces glazed by countless years of persistent moisture. The curve of the arch itself is remarkably precise, too perfect to be merely accidental, too refined to be simply rustic construction. The lintel bears a single, distinct mark. This time, it is not the familiar circle and star, but a serpent devouring its own tail, the Ouroboros, a potent symbol predating the Templars. Indeed, older than Christendom itself, its resonance echoing through ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Gnostic traditions. In each context, it eloquently speaks of cycles, of creation, dissolution, and renewal, of endless recurrence and eternal vigilance. They whisper this profound observation aloud, and the word seems to linger in the air for an unusually extended moment, almost as if the hollow doorway itself is patiently awaiting to absorb it. A ripple gently spreads across the pond's surface, a deliberate, unhurried expansion, yet no discernible wind is present. Their gaze meticulously scans the water for any sign of movement, but nothing is found. The dragonfly, too, has mysteriously vanished. The arched entrance is partially submerged, with the water lapping softly against its base. It is unequivocally clear that beyond this threshold, a tunnel extends deep beneath the encompassing hill. This is no mere mill race or utilitarian drainage channel. Its internal dimensions are ample enough to permit a person to walk upright once inside. The realization sends a shiver through them, a sensation that is not entirely unpleasant. They carefully circumnavigate the pond's perimeter, taking pains not to disturb the water more than absolutely necessary. Upon reaching the doorway, they discover the threshold stone covered in an uneven layer of verdant algae. However, beneath this organic coating, faint lines gradually become visible. Intricate geometric patterns of interlaced triangles forming precise hexagons and stars. The carving is remarkably shallow, exquisitely delicate, almost akin to filigree etched into the solid stone. From within the dark confines of the tunnel, a soft, rhythmic echo returns to them. Drip, drip, drip. It is not the rapid, vivacious chatter of the stream above, but rather the measured, deliberate heartbeat of deep, subterranean water. The air emanating from the opening is cool and carries the distinct aroma of iron and earth, subtly tinged with something faintly herbal, perhaps wild thyme, or the lingering ghost of some ancient, long-forgotten medieval balm. The individuals stood poised at the precipice of the unknown, the allure of the dark passage before them undeniable, tempting them to surrender to its depths, to pursue the faint auditory cues until the subterranean pathway either blossomed into an expansive chamber or succumbed to an ultimate collapse. Yet, an uncanny premonition stirred within their very core, a visceral understanding that this was more than a mere point of ingress. It was, in fact, a profound initiation. To transgress this threshold without a true comprehension of the impending ritual bore the risk of an irreversible transformation. With a hesitant gesture, a hand came to rest upon the ancient archway. The stone, surprisingly, radiated a warmth that defied the cool embrace of the surrounding shade. For a fleeting instant, a subtle pulsation seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the structure, slow and rhythmic, as if the entire edifice drew breath. Above, a sudden agitated flutter broke the stillness. It was the crow once more, its dark form circling low, wings meticulously carving arcs through the air. It settled with an almost deliberate grace upon the lintel, its talons coiling around the intricate relief of a carved serpent, fixing its piercing gaze directly upon the observers. In its beak, a pale, delicate shred, perhaps parchment, perhaps bark, quivered momentarily before the bird released the fragment, allowing it to drift onto the water's surface. The small scrap, borne by the gentle current, eventually snagged amidst a cluster of reeds. With utmost care, the individuals reached down to retrieve it. Its texture was distinctly fibrous, not the smooth finish of paper, but the ancient, resilient feel of vellum. Upon its surface, a faint smear of red-brown pigment was visible, possibly faded ink from a bygone era, or perhaps something imbued with a more profound, vital essence. Only a single, stark letter remained perfectly legible, M. The observers lifted their gaze, but the mysterious crow had vanished without a trace. From the profound depths of the tunnel, the persistent, rhythmic dripping ceased, leaving an intensified silence. The individuals lingered by the arch, their fingers meticulously turning the small vellum fragment, sensing its subtle, uneven contours. The solitary letter M appeared almost too precise, too deliberately rendered to be merely a random remnant of some ancient script. A cascade of names flickered through their minds. Magdalene, Mary, Mariah, each name a distinct portal into the annals of history, each a unique narrative poised to draw them into its compelling embrace. The tunnel yawned before them, its profound darkness unbroken by even the faintest glimmer of ambient light. They tentatively initiated their descent, taking the very first step within. The ground proved to be slick stone, angled sharply downwards, with slender rivulets of water tracing narrow channels along either wall. Here, the former dripping sound had given way to a low, resonant hum, reminiscent of air gently passing through a flute, as if the very place breathed softly in and out. Their initial footsteps echoed, a solitary cadence, then a second, before fading into the slow, pervasive draw of the tunnel's mysterious voice. As the descent continued, the very atmosphere seemed to shift, notably in its olfactory character. The sharp, metallic tang of damp stone deepened, now subtly interwoven with a faint, unexpected sweetness. Perhaps the lingering aroma of dried lavender, or some long-forgotten medieval endeavor at purifying the confined air. Ancient monastic records, indeed, often spoke of intricate tunnel networks beneath certain Templar preceptories, where aromatic herbs were deliberately combusted in censers, not for the solemnity of prayer, but for the imperative of secrecy. This fragrant smoke, it was widely believed, served a dual purpose: to maintain the breathability of the air within the enclosed passages, and crucially, to effectively mask the telltale scent of human presence from any potential pursuers. The observers paused where the rough-hewn walls began to curve gently inward. Here, the stone blocks presented a markedly different aspect. Their surfaces were meticulously polished and fitted with such exquisite precision that not a single trace of mortar line could be discerned. Some historical scholars might argue that such refined craftsmanship points towards a later, post-Templar construction, perhaps the work of 17th-century smugglers ingeniously repurposing an older, pre-existing framework. However, a dissenting faction of historians, drawing attention to the faint, yet discernible geometric motifs delicately etched into the tight joints, steadfastly insists that the work is of an even more ancient provenance, possibly an enduring echo of sophisticated Roman engineering. Leaning in closely, the individuals meticulously traced one of these intricate etchings, and beneath the focused beam of their small torch, the faint patterns of triangles and intersecting lines seemed to awaken, imbued with a subtle vitality. They coalesced not into a familiar stellar configuration this time, but into an incomplete circular form. It was impossible for them to overlook the striking resemblance. The missing arc of this subterranean symbol appeared to perfectly mirror the curve of the Ouroboros that adorned the pond's edge above. Only here, the serpent's head was conspicuously absent, as if patiently awaiting its destined reunion with its body elsewhere. Further into the passage, the ceiling began to lower significantly, necessitating a stooping posture from the explorers. A persistent trickle of water flowed beneath their feet, its sound undergoing a curious transformation, initially sharp and distinct, then muffled and subdued, only to become sharp once more, as if navigating a series of uneven obstacles. The individuals crouched, cautiously dipping their fingers into the cool stream. Submerged beneath the flowing water, a precise row of small, remarkably rounded stones gleamed with an ethereal white luminescence. Each one bore a distinct, enigmatic, rune-like mark. They meticulously counted them, 1, 2, 3, 4, and precisely 13. This particular number resonated with a familiar, almost mystical significance. 13 nights, 13 ships, 13 degrees in certain Masonic rites. Theories, both plausible and speculative, began to accumulate within their minds, stacking themselves like stones in the pervasive darkness. Yet none felt entirely comprehensive or conclusive. a faint emanation of light materialized ahead. Not a brilliant illumination, but rather the subtle glow one might anticipate from a solitary candle or a modest oil lamp. It flickered erratically upon the damp, glistening walls, casting ephemeral patterns that almost seemed to possess an intentional movement. The individuals advanced, but the very instant they traversed a narrow constriction in the tunnel, the light abruptly vanished, leaving in its wake only the profound darkness and the audible rhythm of their own breathing. Just as they contemplated the possibility of retreating, something entirely unexpected brushed against their hand. It was neither the cold, wet sensation of water nor the unyielding hardness of stone. Rather, it was softer, yet possessed a discernible firmness. They raised it towards the torchlight, a strip of leather, rendered rigid and unyielding by the passage of time, embossed with the identical interlaced triangles observed earlier upon the arch's threshold. One extremity had been cleanly severed, while the other was frayed into ragged, worn fibers. It might conceivably have once been a component of a strap or a binding. From deeper within the tunnel's unseen reaches, a distinct sound began to emanate, slow at first, then resolving into an unmistakable pattern, 3 deliberate knocks, followed by a brief, pregnant pause, and then 3 more. The observers froze instantly. That precise rhythm was far too intentional, too structured to be merely a random occurrence. And then, faint but undeniably certain, a voice. It uttered only a single, resonant word: Moriah. The torch, defying any discernible breeze, flickered with an unsettling irregularity. The observers remained utterly motionless. Initially, the uttered name, Moriah, seemed to hang suspended in the frigid air, much like the ethereal tendrils of incense smoke. Light, almost intangible, yet utterly impossible to disregard. It reverberated through the tunnel with an echo that appeared disproportionately vast, far exceeding the physical confines of the surrounding space. They cast a quick glance back towards the path from which they had arrived. The faint, guiding gleam from the pond's entrance had entirely vanished, swallowed by the relentless curve of the tunnel's architecture. The mere contemplation of retracing their steps struck them as oddly unappealing, almost as if turning away now would signify the forfeiture of something that had patiently awaited discovery for centuries. Consequently, they pressed onward. The ground continued its steep descent, and the slender trickle of water that had accompanied them now broadened into a thin yet distinct, clear stream. In the torchlight, its surface glinted with the pristine clarity of glass, and its low, murmuring sound was subtle enough to render the silence between each deliberate step profoundly heavier, almost palpable. The walls began to constrict, their very texture undergoing another remarkable transformation. They were now less the roughly hewn blocks of the upper passage and more akin to naturally worn rock, as though the explorers had transcended the realm of human endeavor and entered the slow, patient, and enduring architecture of the earth itself. A subtle, complex scent began to permeate the air, reaching their senses, the dry, sharp aroma of burnt resin inextricably mingled with something far older, far more elusive to precisely identify. Myrrh, perhaps. The profound irony of this possibility was not lost upon them. Myrrh, the ancient burial spice, its scent now drifting in a place where voices seemed to converse across the vast expanse of centuries. Mount Moriah, the name resurfaced in their minds, bringing with it a tangled web of historical and mythical narratives. Some historians unequivocally connect it to the revered Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the hallowed site of Solomon's Temple, a location held sacred by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Others, with considerably less scholarly consensus, whisper that the enigmatic Knights Templar not only possessed intimate knowledge of its ancient subterranean passages, but, more controversially, extracted from them artifacts or secrets that were never intended to be exposed to the light of day again. Even among the most distinguished scholars, the fundamental dispute stubbornly persists. Was Moriah a specific geographical location, a historical personage, an intricate code word, or perhaps all three facets simultaneously? Rounding a gentle bend in the passage, the torchlight abruptly caught upon a series of forms directly ahead, distinct vertical shapes standing in close proximity. As the observers drew nearer, these shapes resolved into an imposing structure of wooden beams, meticulously set into the tunnel's walls, forming a formidable gate. These beams were bound by sturdy iron bands, which, though heavily rusted by the relentless passage of time, remained remarkably intact. The wood itself was so profoundly dark that it seemed to actively absorb the limited light, and its surface was intricately carved with a complex series of enigmatic symbols. Some were instantly recognizable: the familiar interlaced triangles, the circle with its conspicuous missing arc. Others, however, were far stranger and more obscure. One bore a striking resemblance to a chalice, while another depicted a shape uncannily similar to a key. The air in this section of the tunnel was noticeably colder, and the stream flowing beside them had deepened considerably. Its sound, too, had undergone another transformation. Now it seemed almost to articulate, each ripple and eddy a wordless, resonant syllable. They tested the gate tentatively, but it remained unyielding, refusing to budge. Yet, their touch revealed something profoundly curious. The iron of the bands was not entirely solid. Along one particular band, a narrow slit ran, its width appearing perfectly suited for a flat, thin object. A sudden recollection surfaced in their minds, the strip of leather they had discovered earlier. Could it possibly fit here? With a surge of anticipation, they carefully slid the leather strip into the narrow aperture. A muted, yet distinct, click resonated through the chamber, and with that subtle sound, the iron bands around the gate visibly loosened their grip. The formidable gate then swung inward with surprising, almost effortless ease, revealing a considerably wider chamber beyond its confines. The ceiling in this newfound space soared dramatically upwards, and from an unseen source, a pale, cold light permeated the air. It was not the localized glow of a torch, but rather the diffuse, ethereal luminescence characteristic of moonlight reflected from a body of water. Centered within the chamber lay a stone basin, shallow and perfectly circular in its design. Its rim was meticulously carved with a repeating, ancient motif, a serpent swallowing its own tail, the complete Ouroboros this time, with no missing arc to disrupt its eternal cycle. The basin held water so utterly still that its surface appeared to be a sheet of polished glass. As the observers stepped closer, the surface of the water subtly shifted, not from their movement, but from some unseen activity beneath. Shapes began to form, pale and wavering, as if the water itself possessed a memory, recalling events from the distant past. First, the image of a barren, sunlit mountain emerged, crowned with a single ancient altar stone. Then, a solemn procession of figures, cloaked in white, each bearing a small, rope-bound chest. Finally, the vivid image of a massive and ancient city wall appeared, its towering gate adorned with an arch that bore the unmistakable word, Moriah. The captivating vision then dissolved, leaving only their own reflections staring back from the placid surface. Yet, even their reflections seemed subtly altered, the shadows on their faces now forming patterns that had not been there before. Somewhere behind them, the distinct 3 knocks sounded once more. Only this time, they were not met with silence. From the distant wall of the chamber, another voice emerged. Low, steady, and speaking in a language they did not recognize. Yet, through some profound, inexplicable understanding, they comprehended a single, resonant word: welcome. The singular word, welcome, lingered in the frigid air, its implications curling subtly around the edges of their thoughts. It was clear this was not an invitation extended lightly or without profound significance. The individuals stood poised at the very edge of the stone basin, the pale, ethereal light trembling delicately across the water's surface. The narrow stream that had guided them through the subterranean passages now slipped into a precisely cut channel in the stone floor, feeding the basin with a slow, unwavering trickle. Yet despite this constant influx, the water within the basin never seemed to rise or fall. It remained perfectly level, as if obeying ancient, immutable rules that superseded even the fundamental laws of gravity. The voice did not speak again, but the profound silence that followed felt undeniably inhabited, charged with an unseen presence. The chilling realization settled upon them. They were not, in fact, alone within the vast, echoing chamber. They knelt beside the ancient basin, their hands tracing the cool, smooth curve of its rim. The intricate carvings of the serpent proved far more profound than initially perceived. Each individual scale was meticulously etched with miniature symbols, no larger than a human fingernail. Some bore a resemblance to letters, yet they belonged to no known alphabet, hinting at an archaic script long lost to history. Others appeared to be tiny, complex diagrams, perhaps celestial charts mapping distant star systems, or arcane alchemical sigils promising transformation. At the precise juncture where the serpent's head met its tail, a subtle indentation became apparent. A small depression no larger than the tip of a thumb. Upon pressing this discreet mark, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor rippled through the very bedrock of the floor. The massive basin began to rotate, not with a grinding protest, but with an unnerving smoothness and silence, revealing that it was not merely fixed to the ground, but rested upon a sophisticated, concealed pivot mechanism. As the colossal vessel slowly revolved, the water contained within its depths defied gravity, refusing to spill. Instead, it flowed gracefully inward, as if being drawn down into some unseen, profound subterranean void. When the basin's stately rotation finally ceased, a perfectly circular opening was unveiled at its core, where the water had so recently resided. The liquid was entirely gone, vanished without a trace. In its place now lay a disk of obsidian black stone, polished to an extraordinary degree, reflecting the chamber's dim, pale illumination with a mirror-like, almost hypnotic sheen. They leaned in, drawn closer by an irresistible curiosity. The surface of the enigmatic disk seemed to shift, not physically altering its form, but profoundly transforming their perception. In one fleeting moment, it offered a crystal-clear reflection of their own faces, a fleeting glimpse of their present reality. In the next, It transmuted into a vibrant, living window into an entirely different realm. A vast, wind-swept mountain plateau stretched beneath a sky of such pristine clarity that it seemed to reverberate with an ethereal silence. In the distance stood a colossal tent, resplendent in hues of crimson and gold, its opulent entrance meticulously guarded by two figures clad in stark white robes, each bearing a spear tipped with gleaming silver. Within the tent's cavernous interior, a table was visible, and upon that table, a long, narrow object lay shrouded in linen, its unmistakable contours strongly suggesting the form of a human body. Before they could fully comprehend or process this startling scene, the vision on the disc shimmered and changed once more. Now they were presented with a torchlight hall, its immense expanse lined with massive, ancient stone pillars. Nestled between these colossal supports, chests of blackened, aged wood stood agape, revealing their precious contents. Numerous scrolls meticulously bound in copper, intricately crafted vessels of beaten gold, and a small, exquisite ivory box no larger than the span of a man's hand. The disembodied voice returned, this time not emanating from behind them, but seemingly resonating from within the black disk itself. It spoke in the same enigmatic, unknown tongue, a language beyond their comprehension. Yet, despite the absence of literal meaning in their minds, an intuitive, preternatural understanding settled upon them. What was hidden in Zion now walks the earth. Their contemplation was abruptly interrupted by a harsh, grating sound, stone grinding on stone. From the distant side of the chamber, a monumental slab within the wall began to shift, sliding inward with a deep rumble to reveal another passage. This new path was clearly not hewn by human hands, but appeared to have been formed organically, its natural walls intricately veined with luminous quartz that caught the pale, ambient light and scattered it like a cascade of captured starlight. The air emanating from this newly revealed passage was noticeably warmer, carrying with it a faint, evocative scent of ancient dust and brittle parchment, as if an unseen, centuries-old library had been secreted away within its depths. They rose to their feet, their minds in a quandary, torn between the profound mystery presented by the black disk and the allure of the fresh, unknown path it had inadvertently unveiled. However, the decision was ultimately made for them. Without any warning, the basin rotated once more, smoothly covering the opening, the water flowing back into place as if its serene surface had never been disturbed. The voice, now imbued with a sense of finality, spoke one last resonant message. The way forward is the way down. They took a decisive step toward the beckoning, quartz-veined passage. Somewhere deep within the subterranean labyrinth, the distinctive three knocks resonated once more, now startlingly closer, originating not from behind them, but from the unseen depths ahead. This time, the mysterious knocking was immediately followed by the distinct sound of footsteps. As they ventured into the passage, the crystalline quartz walls caught their portable light, refracting it into shimmering ribbons of vibrant color that rippled elegantly along the ancient stone. The air within this narrow corridor felt distinctly warmer, almost like the faint, slow exhalation of some colossal, slumbering entity deep beneath the earth. The footsteps ahead, which had initially been so clear, had now ceased, yet their lingering echo persisted in their ears, an insistent memory they found impossible to dislodge. The corridor gradually narrowed, compelling them to proceed in single file. Their shoulders occasionally brushed against the protruding crystalline veins embedded in the rock, eliciting faint, delicate chiming noises that resonated through the air, as if the very mountain itself was humming a subtle, resonant reply to their unexpected presence. The faint scent of parchment grew noticeably stronger, but now it mingled with something sharper, more aromatic, the distinct fragrance of cedarwood and a subtle, lingering hint of incense, the kind typically burned in ancient temples where the light of the sun never penetrates. They cast a solitary glance backward, half expecting the basin chamber to have sealed itself irrevocably behind them. Yet the pale, ethereal glow of the chamber was still faintly visible in the distance. Despite this, the profound sense of an increasingly unlikely return weighed heavily upon them. Mainstream historians, they knew, would adamantly assert that no such vast subterranean libraries could possibly exist, that the romantic notion of the Knights Templar concealing priceless manuscripts within crystalline caves was nothing more than a fanciful medieval romance, cleverly disguised as a conspiracy theory. And yet, against all conventional wisdom, tantalizing fringe accounts stubbornly persisted. One obscure chronicler in the late 17th century, for instance, swore under oath to have witnessed an entire, sprawling archive meticulously carved into a massive quartz seam beneath the formidable Montségur, a repository said to be accessible only to those privy to the secret of the stone that sings. While some modern scholars readily dismiss this as a mere allegory for divine revelation, others harbored a suspicion that it was, in fact, a poetic yet accurate description of a clandestine order's very real, very secret hiding place. The footsteps returned, faint once more, but imbued with a deliberate, unhurried cadence. They paused, listening intently. There was no urgency, no hint of flight in the measured rhythm. Whoever, or whatever, lay ahead clearly knew of their pursuit and seemed entirely unconcerned by it, a realization that, paradoxically, offered less reassurance than if the entity had been fleeing. Abruptly, the quartz-laden rock gave way to smooth, unadorned limestone, and the passage widened dramatically into a chamber so impeccably circular it appeared to have been fashioned on some colossal, ancient lathe. In the precise center of this perfectly round space stood a pedestal of lustrous black marble, no taller than a man's waist, upon which rested a singular object of immense gravitas, a book bound in leather so profoundly aged it had acquired the rich, deep hue of dark honey. Encircling the pedestal, shallow, intricate channels had been meticulously cut into the chamber floor, forming a mesmerizing spiral that wound inward directly toward the ancient tome. These channels were filled with water, so utterly still and unblemished that it appeared to be solid glass. They stepped with utmost care onto the narrow stone paths that wound between the water-filled channels. The very air in this chamber felt profoundly different. It was not merely warm, but seemed to pulse faintly, like a slow, resonant heartbeat that they could perceive through the very soles of their boots. As they drew closer to the pedestal, their gaze fell upon the book's leather cover, noting that it was stamped with a deeply symbolic emblem, a serpent gracefully devouring its own tail, an ancient representation of eternal cyclic renewal. Within the loop formed by the serpent, a cross was emblazoned, not the familiar Latin cross, but one with 4 equal arms, its ends flaring elegantly like the stylized petals of a fleur de lis. Their fingers hovered momentarily over the cover, hesitating. The instant their fingertips made contact, the water within the channels began to stir, then moved with a mesmerizing, silent grace, spiraling inward, meticulously following the carved paths toward the pedestal. The movement was utterly silent at first, then gradually accompanied by a faint, ethereal whispering. They glanced around the chamber, seeking the source, but the sound had no single origin. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Some words were distinctly Latin, while others were spoken in a language they had never encountered, a tongue so ancient it resonated with their very being, felt as much as heard. One particular phrase repeated itself again and again in Latin, echoing with profound significance: sanguis custodit veritatem, the blood guards the truth. They opened the book. Its pages were impossibly thin, almost translucent like gossamer silk. The script was rendered in a tight, angular hand, inked in a reddish-brown hue that might once have been a deep black, or perhaps, more ominously, had always possessed a color derived from something more fundamentally human. Interspersed between the lines of dense text were small, intricate diagrams, ancient maps, detailed constellations, and complex geometric figures. Halfway through the venerable volume, they discovered a folded sheet of parchment tucked carefully between two pages. They unfolded it to reveal a drawing of a mountain range instantly recognizable to them, the majestic Pyrenees. A single distinctive peak was marked with a vivid red circle, and beside it, a small cryptic note in Latin: Sub lucem, sub lapidem qui lucet, beneath the stone that shines. The footsteps sounded again, this time with startling proximity, directly behind them. They spun around, heart hammering against their ribs, but the circular chamber was utterly empty. The quartz-lit passage through which they had come was gone, inexplicably replaced by another arched tunnel, leading precipitously downward into deeper, more profound shadow. The book was no longer resting on the black marble pedestal. It was now inexplicably clutched firmly in their hands. And for the first time, a profound question arose in their minds. Had it been given to them, or had it been taken? The new tunnel seemed to swallow them whole. The air here was noticeably cooler than in the shimmering quartz passage, and permeated with the damp, earthy scent of ancient stone that had not encountered the warmth of the sun in countless millennia. Their footsteps were muffled, almost completely absorbed by the very floor itself, as though the earth itself wished no record of their passage. The walls of this new descent were smoother, bearing the clear marks of tools, rather than being naturally carved by the relentless flow of water. Every dozen steps or so, a small, shallow recess appeared in the stone, each cradling the stub of an ancient candle. Some were burned down almost to the wick, their wax petrified into hardened drips resembling frozen rain, vestiges of an earlier passage. Others remained whole, untouched, perfectly preserved, as if patiently awaiting the return of the hand that was meant to light them. They tightened their grip on the book. Its weight felt subtly different here, heavier, imbued with a strange, almost sentient resistance, as though the very pages were reluctant to confront what lay ahead. The tunnel bent sharply to the left, then began to slope downward in a slow, continuous spiral. Somewhere far below, a faint, almost imperceptible echo of water falling into water could be heard. The singular rhythmic drip of a single drop, endlessly repeating its ancient cadence. It was then that they first perceived it. A subtle glow, faint and indistinct at first, then steadily intensifying with each turn of the spiraling descent, until the very stone surrounding them began to shimmer with a soft, ethereal gold. The walls ahead were no longer merely plain rock, but intricately embedded with 1,000 small, glittering crystals, each catching the unseen ambient light and bending it outward, creating a breathtaking display of internal luminescence. The Latin note from the book echoed in their minds, sub lapidem qui luce, beneath the stone that shines. The winding passage terminated abruptly, opening into a vast, cavernous expanse. The ceiling vanished into an impenetrable, inky darkness, but the cavern floor was utterly dominated by a single, colossal boulder of pale quartz, easily the height of 3 men. A soft, steady light welled up from deep within this monolithic quartz formation, casting the entire cavern in a perpetual, otherworldly dawn. At its base, a carved archway, just tall enough for a person to stoop through, beckoned. The arch was not sealed by a conventional door, but by a massive slab of polished stone, meticulously engraved with the same distinctive serpent and cross symbol found on the book's cover. And there, directly in front of this formidable seal, knelt a solitary figure. The figure was cloaked in a robe of coarse, dark wool, its hood drawn low, obscuring the face entirely. One hand rested gently against the unyielding seal, fingers splayed as if intently feeling for some hidden resonance beneath its smooth surface. They took a hesitant step forward. Without raising their head or altering their posture, the figure spoke. The voice was low, raspy with the weight of immense age, yet remarkably steady and clear. "You carry it." They froze, a sudden jolt of recognition and apprehension coursing through them. "The book," the figure continued, its voice unwavering. "It has been waiting." They managed to find their voice, a question escaping their lips. "Who are you?" The hood tilted almost imperceptibly, revealing the subtle curve of a pale cheek and the disconcerting glint of an eye that seemed far too sharp, too ancient, for someone so utterly still. "A custodian," they replied, their voice resonating with quiet authority. "One of the last." The figure rose slowly to their feet, moving with the deliberate, almost ritualistic grace of someone intimately accustomed to guarding sacred, profound things. "You have come farther than most," they continued, their gaze now fixed upon them. "But to venture further still will demand more than mere curiosity." With a solemn gesture, they indicated the monumental seal. "This door does not yield to strength. It opens to blood." The words themselves imparted a chill more profound than the ambient air. "What manner of blood is this?" they inquired, despite a disquieting premonition that already whispered the answer. The custodian's lips curved into an enigmatic expression that hovered delicately between a knowing smile and a subtle yet potent admonition. "It is the very sanguine lineage that meticulously inscribed the ancient tome, the same bloodline that once instilled profound terror in the hearts of reigning monarchs and became the relentless quarry of powerful pontiffs. It is, unequivocally, the blood that bears the immutable essence of truth." The cloaked figure then gracefully moved aside, extending a hand to indicate their approach towards the enigmatic barrier. The luminescence emanating from the monumental quartz boulder appeared to intensify, banishing any vestige of shadow from beneath their feet. A profound intuition stirred within them, a certainty that traversing this mystical threshold would irrevocably alter their existence in ways that transcended mere measurement. They extended a hand, pressing it gently yet firmly against the ancient seal. The stone was remarkably warm, and beneath their touch, it began to throb with a faint, rhythmic vitality. The very rock seemed to respire beneath their palm, drawing a breath, then another, before releasing a slow, deliberate exhalation, akin to the gentle sigh escaping the slumbering form of a colossal titan. A delicate fissure materialized beneath their fingertips, initially appearing as nothing more than a slender filament of darkness. This minute crack gradually widened, meticulously tracing the sinuous body of a serpent, curling intricately through the form of a cross, until the once solid seal became a complex, interlocking puzzle, now in the process of unfastening itself. The accompanying sound was not the harsh, abrasive grinding of stone against stone, but something infinitely softer, a deep, resonant hum, as if the very rock remembered an ancient melody, a song older than recorded memory itself. The custodian stepped back, their arms folded serenely within the voluminous folds of their robe, their expression utterly unreadable, a mask of impassive observation. Simultaneously, the quartz boulder's inherent glow intensified further, casting a pearly, almost ethereal sheen over the rugged cavern walls. In its incandescent light, the myriad crystals embedded within the stone began to sparkle with an astonishing brilliance, like miniature constellations scattered across a cosmic canvas. And for a fleeting, wondrous moment, the protagonist felt as though they stood at the very epicenter of the night sky, rather than deep within the earth's embrace. As the ancient seal finally parted, a current of warm air wafted forth, dry and faintly redolent of myrrh, mingled with a subtle metallic note, reminiscent of a faint tang of blood. They stepped inside the newly revealed space. The chamber beyond was not vast or cavernous as they had perhaps anticipated, but rather circular and surprisingly intimate. Its walls were meticulously lined with polished basalt, a stone so profoundly black it resembled the glassy surface of still, undisturbed water. At the precise center of this chamber rested a raised stone table, simple yet commanding. Upon it lay a narrow chest, crafted from cypress wood, meticulously bound in bronze. The ornate bronze fittings were intricately etched with the identical serpent and cross motif observed on the seal. Here, however, the serpent was depicted wearing a crown, and its tail coiled into a distinct spiral that strikingly resembled a stylized sun. Arranged around the table stood 12 meticulously carved chairs, each positioned to face inward. They bore the marks of significant age and use, yet showed no signs of decay. The oak had darkened over centuries, their seats smoothed to a silken finish, as though countless individuals had occupied them for prolonged periods. Remarkably, not a speck of dust lay upon them. They cast a quick glance toward the custodian, who then spoke, their voice a soft, almost reverent murmur. "This, you see, is the table of the last convocation," they explained. The sacred place where the guardians solemnly swore their binding oath when the order itself faced its precipitous collapse. Certain historians, even to this day, continue to debate whether the Knights Templar truly managed to abscond with any tangible treasure, or if their legendary great secret amounted to nothing more than gold cleverly concealed from the avaricious French crown. If those skeptical scholars were present in this very moment, the protagonists suspected they might be compelled to reconsider their entrenched theories, though perhaps they would stubbornly insist it was merely a clever forgery, designed solely to preserve the comforting edifice of their academic footnotes. The custodian then approached the table with deliberate intent. Their hands moved with a ritualistic precision as they unlatched the intricate bronze fittings securing the chest. The lid opened without the slightest creak, revealing not a trove of glittering jewels nor a cache of ancient coins, but a single, ancient scroll. It was rolled around a core of dark, unidentifiable wood, its edges faintly luminous, as if it had been painted with light itself rather than mere ink. The writing adorning its surface was unlike anything they had ever encountered, part ancient Greek, part archaic Hebrew, and part something else entirely. A script that felt less like a language and more like a resonant whisper from another age. The testament of the blood, the custodian declared, their voice imbued with solemnity, painstakingly inscribed by the very last individual to openly bear the hallowed name. The protagonist instinctively reached toward the scroll, but the custodian gently placed a restraining hand over theirs. "It is not to be deciphered here," they warned, their tone firm but measured. "If you choose to take it, the door will seal irrevocably behind you, and the path back will be utterly transformed, never again the same." The protagonist almost let out a soft, mirthless laugh, realizing the profound inappropriateness of any loud sound in this sacred space. "What then is the alternative?" they quietly inquired. The custodian regarded them with an intense, prolonged gaze. "Leave it," they finally offered. "Simply walk away and retain your life as it has always been, safe, tranquil, and entirely untouched by the profound truths that await above." A single drop of water fell somewhere within the chamber's unseen recesses, though no visible source for it could be discerned. They looked once more at the scroll. Its faint glow now seemed to pulse in subtle synchronicity with their own heartbeat, a shared rhythm. Their mind raced, conjuring images of the ancient map, the secluded monastery, the hidden quartz passage, the cryptic Latin note that had guided them, of the centuries that had meticulously shaped this extraordinary path long before their feet ever embarked upon it. They thought of the bloodline, if indeed it was a bloodline, intricately woven through every thread of this grand tapestry. Their hand closed resolutely around the scroll. The custodian exhaled slowly, a sound of resigned acceptance. So be it. At that instant, the quartz light flared dramatically. The polished basalt walls seemed to shiver perceptibly, and the massive seal behind them slid shut with a deep, resonant sigh, akin to a tomb returning to its eternal slumber. Somewhere far above, amidst the silent, crumbling ruins, the wind shifted direction, a subtle, almost imperceptible change. The subterranean chamber no longer felt like a mere cavern. Its atmosphere had transformed entirely. The air was palpably thicker, weighted with an almost electric charge that prickled the skin. Each breath carried the distinct taste of iron and incense, as though they were inhaling something simultaneously sacred and profoundly forbidden. The custodian made no move toward any discernible exit, perhaps. Indeed, there was no longer one to move toward. Instead, they walked slowly and deliberately around the solemn circle of 12 chairs, their fingers tracing the worn contours of each backrest with a quiet reverence. "These," they murmured, their voice a low, resonant drone, "are the hallowed seats of the witnesses, each one meticulously carved for a knight who swore a solemn oath to carry the truth to the very ends of the earth, should the heart of the order ever fall. They carried nothing of material gold, only the invaluable treasures of memory and blood. The protagonist's gaze instinctively returned to the scroll clutched in their hands. Its surface appeared to ripple subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though the ancient parchment itself possessed a living essence. A distinct warmth permeated their palms, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic beat, a heartbeat that was undeniably not their own. The custodian then gestured toward the precise center of the stone table. "Place it there," they commanded softly. "Let the sacred circle bear witness once more." With a discernible reluctance, they complied. The very instant the scroll made contact with the ancient stone, faint, luminous lines of light raced outward from its resting place, radiating along the minute cracks in the table's surface, coalescing into a perfect, glowing sunburst. Simultaneously, the 12 chairs began to hum, each emitting a slightly different pitch, until the individual sounds merged into a single, profound, low tone that seemed to vibrate deep within their very bones. The custodian's voice rose, not in volume, but in commanding authority. The words they uttered were in that same strange, hybrid tongue inscribed upon the scroll. Though the protagonist possessed no understanding of the language, meaning bloomed unbidden and powerfully within their mind. By the blood of the teacher, by the seed that walks unseen, by the hands that bore the crushing weight when Rome turned its face away. We recall, we remain, we rise when called. The resonant hum deepened further, becoming an almost tangible presence. The polished basalt walls, previously an impenetrable black, now began to flicker with vivid, ephemeral visions. They beheld sprawling cities, vast, desolate deserts, and majestic ships cresting the horizon under the ominous glow of a blood-red sunset. They saw the faces of countless men and women spanning across centuries, some adorned with crowns, others cloaked in mystery, some bearing the distinctive red cross of the temple, while others wore the plain, unassuming garb of homespun cloth. Yet a singular, unifying look resided in all their eyes, an unshakable resolve, a profound determination, tempered by an underlying current of sorrow. One image lingered longer and more profoundly than the rest. A woman cloaked in deep green robes, standing serenely within a chamber illuminated solely by flickering candlelight. In her arms, she cradled a small child. Her face, though marked by a quiet weariness, was utterly radiant, and she stared directly at the protagonist as though she possessed an innate knowledge of their presence. The child's tiny hand clutched a silver medallion, upon which was etched the familiar symbol of the crowned serpent. As the vivid visions receded and faded into the dark basalt, the custodian observed them intently, their gaze piercing. "Now you comprehend," they stated simply. It was never about tangible gold, nor was it ever about precious relics. It was, and always has been, about the line, the living, unbroken line. The protagonist spoke before their conscious mind could fully process the thought, and it's still out there. Their expression remained utterly unchanged. "Not out there," they gently corrected. "Up there, walking the bustling streets, sitting quietly in cafes, imparting knowledge in schools, writing in rooms you pass without ever truly noticing. The blood hides in plain sight, woven into the fabric of everyday existence." The protagonist glanced toward where the immense quartz boulder should have been, but saw only the unbroken, seamless darkness of a solid wall. How do I find my way out? The custodian stepped aside, indicating the scroll. You now carry the testament. That, and nothing less, is both your key and your burden. The way out will present itself when the world itself decides it is finally time for you to speak. The very stone floor beneath their feet began to undulate, appearing to ripple like disturbed water. The entire tableau, the solemn circle, the 12 ancient chairs, the enigmatic custodian, all dissolved seamlessly into shifting shadow. The pervasive hum gradually faded into silence. They blinked, and in that instant found themselves standing amidst the familiar ruins above, the cool night wind brushing gently against their face. The sky overhead was pristine and clear, the stars sharp and icily brilliant against the velvet blackness. In their hands, they still clutched the scroll. Its glow was dim now, a mere ember, but still emanating a comforting warmth. Somewhere in the surrounding darkness, an owl's haunting call echoed. They looked toward the winding road leading back to the distant village, the path illuminated solely by the ethereal glow of the moon. The wind shifted once more, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible scent of incense. And in that profound moment, they realized with absolute certainty that from this point forward, they would never again perceive history, nor the countless individuals who passed them on the street in quite the same way.